Good evening. All right. So, oops. In compliance with Chapter 551, Open Meetings of the Texas Government Code, I call to order an information session of the Board of Trustees of Austin ISD for Thursday, June 8th, 2023 at 6:05 p.m. A quorum of the board is physically present at AISD Central Office to conduct this meeting. This meeting is streaming live on AISD TV and Apple TV. It's also being broadcast on cable channel 22 through Spectrum, Astound Broadband, and on channel 99 through AT&T UVerse. Closed captioning in English is available on these platforms for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. To our audience tuning in remotely and here in person, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. We will move to the approval of the agenda. Secretary Boswell, do you have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, having a motion by Secretary Boswell and a second by Trustee Zapata to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. The motion passes unanimously. All right, Secretary Boswell, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the pledge to the Texas flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro lealtad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Te honro, bandera de Texas. Te juro lealtad, Texas. Un estado bajo Dios, uno e indivisible.
Thank you. All right, next we have an opportunity for the public to share comments with the board. This time allows speakers to comment publicly on any topic of their choosing. We have time for up to 60 speakers, and as a reminder, the district continues to provide time during the regular voting meetings of the board to hear from the public about agenda items for consideration and vote. This is an opportunity for the board to take part in active listening, and while we wish we could respond or provide feedback, we are required to limit our questions to requests for clarification or follow-up directly to the administration. Members of the public wishing to participate in the public comment portion of our meeting called a dedicated AISD phone line in advance of the meeting to audio record their remarks. We will now play the recorded messages for public comment, so please listen carefully.
My name is Wendy, and I'm a community member. I'm calling on agenda items 11.7, 15.3, and 17.1. I'm calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and words of bully cheer coaches and parents and their inappropriate use of public comment to further bullying of in AISD. I'm saddened and I'm disheartened that this was allowed to happen and request AISD to take appropriate action related to the employment of the AISD staff members involved. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this occurring, and also consider employment action in executive session. Thanks so much.
My name is Maria. I've been a parent in AISD for at least 13 years. Many more people called in the last meeting, but Austin ISD refused to play their public comments. Meanwhile, Austin ISD allowed to be bullied in public comment by their employees. I am disgusted by the behavior of two Bowie High School cheer coaches who have engaged in unethical conduct, including FERPA violations, isolation, exclusion, and bullying of them. I am disappointed in the leadership in this district for allowing this, and I am disappointed in our board and its council for allowing the public comment section of a board meeting to be weaponized against. Terrible and untrue things are said about it in this district in public comment done publicly as an intentional way to harass, bully, and defame who fully qualifies in every respect to participate in. As though the harm they've caused already hasn't been enough, Bowie High School cheer coaches led a small group of parents with a pattern of disorderly conduct into a board meeting to bully and scream, "You suck" at our board. This type of behavior is prohibited in sporting events as well. The coaches and any employee involved violated educator ethics and AISD policy and should have been immediately placed on leave. asking that you take action and that you make meaningful changes such that students in our district are protected and nothing like this happens again. Thank you.
My name is Anna. I am a community member. I'm calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and words of Bowie cheer coaches and parents in their inappropriate use of public comment to further in Austin ISD. The behaviors displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA, policy, and law do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator or the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD's employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to it, amend board policies to prevent this occurring, and consider employment action in executive session. Thank you.
My name is Deborah Trejo, and I'm a community member and a parent in AISD. And I'm calling again to express dismay about the treatment of the behavior of staff and community members with regard to has been unacceptable. It appears that, including at a board meeting, there were violations of the privacy of the student, and there was a general lack of disdain and respect for inclusion of people with disabilities. In addition, AISD staff involved at a higher level outside of the campus and staff within campus have appeared to not be working towards a collaborative and conciliatory resolution to the issues on the campus. We've got to do a better job in AISD to message, support, and reinforce inclusive practices for all students on all of our campuses. That is something new in AISD because of the past and present behaviors that continue to persist, including in this instance. We've got to do better to be really authentic when we say.
Anonymous, I'm calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and words of Bowie cheer coaches and parents and their inappropriate use of public comment to further bullying of in Austin ISD. The behaviors displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator or the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related, amend board policies to prevent this from occurring, and consider employment action in executive session. Thank you.
I'm a parent of a Bowie High School student. I'm shocked at last month's use of public comment to share publicly details of a grievance that affects an Austin ISD. The conduct displayed by some of the callers and attendees, the many apparent violations of policy and law, do not meet the high standards and ethics of any educator, much less for Austin ISD. Is this what families can expect if they file a confidential grievance? I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this occurring in the future, and in executive session consider employment action for any employees who participated. Please also consider reviewing policies around this with all employees to ensure that this does not happen to any student. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Wambach. We're zoned for Bowie. I'm calling about the incident which occurred at last month's board meeting related to the public comments that were played. It is unacceptable to allow public comments to be used to bully and violate privacy. The behaviors displayed by Bowie cheer coaches and parents violated FERPA policy and law. The actions of coaches and staff do not meet the high standards and ethics of the educator or the high standards and goals of AISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should have been immediately suspended without pay pending a full investigation. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this from occurring in the future, and consider employment action in executive session. Thanks, y'all.
Good evening. My name is Roxanne Evans of the East Austin Coalition for Quality Education and a longtime AISD supporter and volunteer. I'm calling to condemn the actions, behavior, and words of Bowie High cheer coaches and parents in their inappropriate use of public comment to further bully in Austin ISD. The behaviors they displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator or the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any AISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this from happening again, and consider employment action in executive session. It also may be time for a refresher course on No Place for Hate. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chris Doherty. I served on the board of the Austin Project in the past. Currently, I am board chair of Austin Voices for Education and Youth. I'd like to commend the district for its long history of support for family resource centers of the type that Austin Project had and that Austin Voices for Education and Youth currently operates. These centers work with families to increase family stability, increasing the likelihood that students will show up in school every day ready to learn. In addition, the centers organize events and activities that help create a sense of community around the schools. Activities include adult education, community feedback sessions, and in-person healthcare outreach. Community events include Hope Fest, Harvest Fest, Steam Fest, and the Burn It Holiday Fair. Building community is in a positive, supportive, constructive way is exactly what our polarized nation sorely needs. Thank you so much for supporting these efforts.
My name is Christina, and I'm calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and words of the Bowie cheer coaches and parents in their inappropriate use of public comment to further bullying in Austin ISD. The behaviors displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator or the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this occurring and consider employment action and execution in executive session. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Selena. I am an AISD parent. I am calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and the words of the Bowie cheer coaches and parents inappropriately using for public comment, and to condone and further the bullying in Austin ISD. The behaviors displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator, of the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to it and to amend board policies to prevent this from occurring and consider employment action in executive session. Thank you.
My name is Nikki. I'm calling to condemn the action, behaviors, and words of Bowie cheer coaches and parents and their inappropriate use of public comment to further bullying of a child in ISD. The behaviors displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator or the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this occurring and consider employment action in executive session.
Good evening. My name is Ara Merjanian. I'm a local business owner, Austin Voices board member and immediate past chair, and proud parent of children who attended AISD schools. I'm leaving this message regarding agenda item 9.4, Family Resource Centers, and talking about our most recent annual report on FRCs and related community school elements, which you should have received by now via email. This year's report is more elaborate than usual, reflecting the activities and fallout from COVID and the continuing challenges our community faces in enrollment and attendance, youth mental health, teacher and staff shortages, and lost and delayed learning. We commend it to you as it reflects the national conversation that is happening around the social determinants of academic achievement, the best practices for school improvement, and the evidence-based approaches recommended by Brookings Institution, University of Pennsylvania's Netter Center for Community Partnerships, RAND Corporation, NEA, AFT, the U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Surgeon General, and AASA, the National Superintendents Association, among others. We hope you find this report complete and useful. Please let us know if you have any questions or need anything else.
Hi, I'm a student at Bowie High School. I was bullied in a board meeting a few weeks back by my coaches and a few of their parent friends. If I acted like that about a teammate, I would be disciplined, but I never would act like that towards anyone. I don't think anything like that should ever happen to anyone, and I'm asking the board to send a clear message that this is never okay. Thank you.
Hello, members of the school board. My name is Summer Seibert, and I'm a proud mom of a rising third grade Ridgetop Rattler and a rising sixth grade Lamar Scotty. I'm calling today to speak about HB 3, a bill that recently passed in the Texas legislature that will require an armed presence on every school campus. I urge the board to avoid using the Guardian or Marshall plans to meet these requirements, which enable teachers, administrators, and staff to bring firearms to school with only minimal training. Armed teachers are never acceptable replacements for trained law enforcement. The average number of hours that a law enforcement officer receives at a basic training academy is 840, and officers are required to continue training regularly throughout their careers. In contrast, the Marshall program requires only 80 hours of training. The Guardian program only requires 15 to 20 hours. Even some of the most highly trained law enforcement officers in the country see their ability to shoot accurately decrease significantly when engaged in gunfights with perpetrators. To expect a teacher to make split-second life or death decisions to try to take down an active shooter is unrealistic. Guardians and Marshals will cause our schools to be less safe, not safer. Thank you.
Courtney Peterson commenting on HB 3. Good evening, members of the school board. I'm a parent to a first grader in AISD and also a licensed clinical social worker. I'm here today to speak about a newly enacted requirement that all public school campuses must have an armed presence during school hours. I'd like to urge the board to avoid using the Guardian or Marshall plans. Both of these plans enable teachers, administrators, and other civilians to bring firearms to schools with only minimal training. A law enforcement officer receives at minimum 840 hours of training, compared to the Marshall program, which only requires 80 hours of training, and the Guardian program, which requires only 16 hours. Research strongly supports the finding that if teachers carry guns into schools, children are more likely to access those guns. I'm also concerned that armed teachers and administrators will create a heightened level of anxiety, fear, and negatively affects a school's climate for teaching and learning. In conclusion, I firmly believe that AISD should reject the use of Guardian and Marshall programs. Arming teachers and staff poses significant risks to our students' safety and sacrifices the primary focus of our educators. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emma Sumners. I'm an AISD parent. I'm calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and words of Bowie cheer coaches and parents in their inappropriate use of public comment to further bullying of in Austin ISD, the behaviors displayed, and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law that do not meet the high standards and ethics of an educator or the high standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this occurring, and consider employment action in executive session. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Nicole, and I am a former AISD employee and community advocate for our AISD students and families. I am calling to condemn the actions, behaviors, and words of Bowie cheer coaches and parents in their inappropriate use of public comment to further bullying in Austin ISD. The behaviors displayed and the many apparent violations of FERPA policy and law do not meet the high school standards and ethics of an educator or high school standards and goals of Austin ISD. Any Austin ISD employees involved in this should be terminated. I'm asking for the board to review and redact publicly available information related to amend board policies to prevent this from occurring and to consider employment action in the executive session. Thank you.
So this concludes.
Wendy, and
Okay. This concludes public comment. So, trustees, are there any questions or clarifications you have for Superintendent Segura? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Boswell.
I have one question about the calls about HB3 and security. Just would like to clarify the distinction between what the law allows and what the administration is considering, if that's something you can speak to briefly.
So my preference would be to have that conversation in executive session before we come out. I will say that we are taking a thoughtful approach, and we certainly recognize sensitivity around this, so we want to make sure that we're all on the same page before we present anything publicly, but more than happy to do that after we have a conversation.
All right, thank you. All right, so as a reminder, please feel free to share any general comments or questions with the board by email at trustees@austinisd.org. All right, so next up is the president's report. So the board hopes our students, staff, and community are enjoying summer, even though it's been a little bit rainier than usual. If you're a gardener like me, maybe you're grateful for that. To our students, whether you're preparing for college, career in life, or transitioning to a new school level, or, just preparing for a new grade, we really hope that you take some time to relax, enjoy your family and your friends, and maybe read a couple of books, do some math problems too. But for now, it's okay to just have fun. Everyone needs a break every now and then. So summer is also really a great time for celebration, and AISD is excited to continue our celebration of Pride Month and the recognition that in Austin, all means all, or as we say, all means y'all. The district kicked off with a pride flag raising this week and will host community building circles, an artwork gallery, and button making during the month in this office. And as a reminder, the district will also celebrate Pride Week every March during the school year so that our campuses may also celebrate our students. And I'll just say personally, I just so appreciate being part of a district that celebrates Pride Month unapologetically. Every single student and staff member and community member is welcome here in AISD, and that's a value that I think we all hold very dear. On June 19th, AISD will be closed in recognition of Juneteenth, but we will be celebrating during the historic Juneteenth parade that Saturday. We invite students, staff, and families to come to the Juneteenth parade on June 17th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Down Chacon Street, Rosewood, and over to Rosewood Neighborhood Park. Those interested in joining AISD on the parade can come no later than 9 a.m. to the Rising Star Baptist Church meeting site, where we will walk together during the 1.2-mile parade route. And we really look forward to seeing everyone out there. It is usually pretty hot, but it is so much fun. In 2 weeks, the board will hold the last regular voting meeting of the 2022-23 school year. This meeting will include a public hearing for the district's budget and voting on the items discussed tonight under the preview. And we know Ed Ramos and your team have worked super hard, and we really appreciate your diligence on all of that. As a reminder, the Board of Trustees will take a break from regular and information meetings in July. So that'll be a nice break, because I think the last couple of Julys we have plowed through and had meetings, so that'll be nice. Like many of the district's staff, however, we will continue our own professional learning these next few weeks, and these next 2 months the board is scheduled to take part in an annual self-assessment of the team of 10, discussion and refinement on our board project management plans, governance training, discussion on the district scorecards, Lone Star governance training in particular, and team building. And also, I believe, Trustee Kaufman, you had a couple of words you wanted to share as well.
Sure. I just wanted to just recognize all of our graduates and all of the school personnel and the district personnel who put together the graduations. It was an amazing experience to witness both the organization of the campuses and the care and compassion and concern they had for their students through that process, and also to see all the blue shirts of our volunteers from AISD who were out there with the logistics, and it was a very inspirational thing. And for us on the board, I think I can speak for our colleagues that it's a tremendous honor to attend the graduations, to be present on the stage, and then to see the faces and shake the hands of the students who are at the center of every decision that we make. And so I just want to, again, shout out for all the graduates, shout out for everyone who made it happen, and to just express my gratitude for that. And quick shout out to Trustee Hunter, who I believe was the only one of us with perfect attendance with 15 out of 15 graduates. So.
Thank you very much, Trustee Oh, that's right, and Mr. Hicks. All right, so, all right. Well, our next item tonight is a legislative update. So, Secretary Boswell, can you please share the update?
Yes, happy to. And I will start with some graduation-related thanks related to the legislative update as well. We had the Travis County Tax Office and Travis County Voter Registration Office come to our graduations as they do each year. It's a longstanding tradition in Austin ISD, along with teams of volunteer deputy registrars, to register our graduates who had not registered to vote yet. And we, the last report I got was they expected to register more than 100 students who were there to graduate. So their captive audiences before graduation starts all lined up in their robes. It's a great time to celebrate. They take pictures. So really appreciate the work that was done to make sure that they're having that opportunity to put into practice some of what they've learned about being civically engaged while they've been in our schools. So thank you for that, everyone who is part of it, and thank you to all the students who chose to take advantage of that opportunity. Legislative session update. This is the first time we have met since the session ended. Session started with very high hopes that the legislature would use some of our state's unprecedented $32.7 billion with a B surplus to increase funding for public education and provide much needed relief to our public schools, teachers and others who work in our schools. Close to the end of the session, the Senate added vouchers in the form of education savings accounts to the only school funding bill that was House Bill 100. After that was done, the session ended with no increase in the basic allotment and also no approval of vouchers. And that basic allotment is the building block of our per student funding statewide. HB 100, before it was amended, proposed to increase the basic allotment by $90 in 2024 and by an additional $50 in 2025. It would have required districts to spend at least half of that increase on raising pay for people who work in our schools and our districts. The bill also would have created an automatic inflation adjustment for the basic allotment. The Senate passed a substitute bill before, rather than voting on that added an $8,000 education savings account voucher for many students in our state, reduced the increase in the basic allotment from the proposed prior version to just $50, added funding for charter facilities and open school district boundaries to any transfer requests if there was capacity. After that major amendment, no agreement was reached by the Senate and House, so the session ended without any movement on an increase in the basic allotment. The governor said he will call a special session on school choice, but has not mentioned including public school funding in that special session, so we will be watching, continuing to watch what's coming. Bills sent to the governor include a new system for rating school library books based on sexually explicit material, a law allowing up to 3% of students to take standardized tests on paper rather than online. That's 3% for each district. Changes to the accelerated instruction created last session by House Bill 4545 for catching up on learning loss. New rules to increase Algebra 1 access for 8th graders, and in turn to increase access to high-level math in high school. I know that's something we've talked about as a district, so I'm excited to see more about that. An increase in payments for retired teachers, that's something many have advocated for. Changes to our school safety allotments and requirements, including new rules about design of building, and as our callers mentioned, an armed presence on campus that can take several forms. Allowing chaplains to serve in place of school counselors in many circumstances, a new bill about tax abatements for large-scale economic development, a major change in curriculum that will be offered by the state, and a new scholarship program for aspiring teachers that also has some exciting potential. Noteworthy bills that died include school funding, vouchers and education savings account, a bill that would have required display of the 10 Commandments in classrooms, and a new law about virtual education. So thank you to everyone who engaged and advocated and helped us shape our priorities, and more to come.
That's hard to hear. Some of that is really hard to hear, but I appreciate your advocacy. We will now move to our information reports and updates. So Mr. Seguda, would you please introduce the next item?
Absolutely, I'd love to. Item 5.1, good evening, President Singh and trustees. I'd like to invite our Chief Financial Officer, Edward Ramos, to join us and lead us through the proposed budget.
President Singh, Superintendent Seguda, members of the board, we are going to go over our proposed budget. Much of this information you have already heard. I'm going to go through the highlights, but with the recommended budget, there are opportunities for us to reduce our overall deficit, and we're going to talk about that plan as far as how we would approach that opportunity. Because, as you know, we are looking at a deficit budget, so we want to make sure that we continue to be good stewards of our taxpayer dollars and look at opportunities to reduce our expenditures over the next fiscal year. So that being said, of course, we based our budget on a flat enrollment, 73,681 students. Our attendance rate, we projected a 92% attendance rate, which we feel is very conservative. And then, of course, our property value growth, we projected a 14% growth. Because of property tax compression from the state, we are projecting a maximum compressed tax rate of 0.7246. What that basically means is once we compute our tax rate, our M&O tax rate would be 0.8036 cents. Our debt service tax rate, 12.3 cents. So we're looking next year at a tax rate of 92.66 cents, pending legislative discussions and final decisions. As far as the development of the budget, this budget, the numbers, of course, that you will see before you today are based on current state funding. And the reason we do that is we want to make sure that we continue to be conservative when we plan our budget and our expenditures. We also maintained our 20% fund balance policy, so that is included in this recommendation tonight. And then, of course, we continue to invest in our employees, and so that was a huge budget priority that we discussed throughout the budgeting process when we engaged with staff and community throughout this process of several months that we engaged with everyone in this process. It was very apparent that compensation was our #1 priority, and so that is what the board voted on last month, and we continue to invest a high percentage of our budget in our staff, which is 87%. So that continues to remain consistent in our district budget. We also have faced, as you know, and Trustee Boswell alluded to this, legislative challenges. And so we were very hopeful that we would see an increase to the basic allotment this year. Unfortunately, based on the conversations that continue to occur at the legislative level, we have not seen any increase to the basic allotment. And so that has been a disappointment, not only for Austin ISD, but for districts throughout the state. And so we remain active and really looking to see what the final outcome will be this legislative session. But because of the current decisions that have been made, we want to make sure that we continue to be conservative with our budget proposal. And then as part of this budget, because we are proposing a deficit budget, and I just want to note that we are not alone as far as school districts are concerned throughout the state of Texas. Based on what we are seeing, the conversations that are occurring at the legislative level, you will see districts throughout the state being forced to pass deficit budgets. With that being said, many of these districts, including Austin ISD, we are going to have to move forward with some tough decisions in really diving into our budget and looking at where can we reduce expenditures just to remain financially solvent and stable. And so we do have a deficit reduction plan built into this budget. And so I just want to highlight that is the direction based on what we are seeing this legislative session that we will have to really maneuver and act on as a district over the next fiscal year. So our proposed budget that we are looking at, of course, our recapture payment for next year has jumped to $941 million. So without any increase to our basic allotment in our funding, we will continue to face challenges with our recapture payment. So next year we are projecting that to be $941 million. Operating expenditures, $884 million. And so we are proposing a budget deficit of $53 million. You will hear later on in the presentation some options to reduce that overall deficit. So when you look at the current forecast with the $53 million deficit, with the out years, fiscal year 24-25, you're looking at a $69 million deficit. Fiscal year 25-26, $61 million. Fiscal year 26-27, $52 million. And so you will see that our fund balance begins to decline. And so one of the things that we will see in later slides is if we do nothing, this is our worst case scenario. And so when you look at the numbers, it's pretty clear that we have to have a plan to continue to reduce our overall expenditures in the district. And so this graphic basically shows what would happen to our fund balance if we continue to spend as is without any type of reduction strategy. And so when you look at the overall numbers, we are meeting our fund balance percentage for the 23-24 school year, but the out years you start seeing that we do fall below our 20% fund balance policy. And so again, looking at the numbers, 21.2% next year, 16.1% the year after that, and then it drops off drastically. So based on these current projections, and again, this is based on current school funding, we do have to come up with a plan to make sure that we reduce overall expenditures over the next fiscal year and fiscal years after that. And so again, looking at the legislative climate, looking at minimal increases to the basic allotment, if any at that, we are basically backed up against the wall with having, or we are being forced to make decisions as a district, and those decisions are going to impact students. So that's what makes these decisions pretty tough. But we are going to involve our community, our staff, as far as what can we continue to invest in, and what basically what services can we no longer afford as a district. And so that's why we are looking at preliminary deficit reduction strategies. And so originally we looked at potential additional state funding of $6 million. For a budget our size, that is a minimal amount, and so we wanted to make sure that we stayed conservative with the additional funding that we would receive from the state, which is why we included $6 million. Right now, as Trustee Boswell mentioned, we have no additional funding from the state. The proposed funding before the session ended was $50 per student increase to the basic allotment. Just to keep up with inflation, that increase needed to be between $900 and $1,000. So you see the huge gap in what the state is proposing versus what we are actually seeing in the conversations. We also, if we adopt this budget as is, we are committing to pay our recapture payment on time, which is in August. What that does is that allows us to earn an additional $10 million in interest earnings with the understanding that we may face an impact on our first rating. So this past first rating, we did lose 6 points because we paid our recapture payment on time. So what the state does is they look at your current liabilities, and if you have a high current liability, the state dings you for that in your financial rating. So our large current liability is our recapture payment. So our fiscal year ends in June. We don't pay that in June, so we continue to have a high liability until August when we pay it. And so we are committing to maximizing our interest earnings and paying our recapture payment on time. So that's an additional $10 million. We are and will look at opportunities to increase enrollment through our enrollment department. And so with the half percentage increase to enrollment, we're looking at $1.5 million. So we're conservatively adding that in our potential deficit reduction strategies. And then as far as expenditures, we would look at reductions through attrition, through vacancies. So as vacancies occur, specifically including in the function 41 and 21 groups, which are administrative and school support, that affects our administrative cost ratio, which you will see in a later slide. But those positions, those areas, we would look at very closely to make sure that we are within line of the TEA guidelines with administrative costs. Also, we would look at all contracts and softwares to see if there are cost-saving opportunities with those reductions. We would take advantage of our 2022 bond program, and so we did build some dollars in there to alleviate our operating budget with replacement of large equipment. So historically, we have paid for that equipment through operations, but now we set aside $25 million to be able to pay for that equipment out of the 2022 bond program. So that would generate savings over the next 5 years. And so we have built that into our deficit reduction strategies. Also looking at and doing a deep dive with inefficient costs in the district. And so we would basically, again, look to staff, community, and create a budget oversight committee to assist us with recommendations on how we can continue to reduce our expenditures over the next fiscal year. And then, of course, maximize Title I funding. And so one of the things that we want to make sure we don't do is leave money on the table with Title I, maximize our Title I spending, make sure that we take care of our campuses that need these funds. And so we are looking internally at improving our processes to simplify what it takes for a principal and a campus to spend these Title I dollars. So we are currently working on that and really creating a plan to make sure that we maximize these dollars. And so we are also looking at a timeline to begin to implement these changes. One of the things that we know is that we will be looking at our budget in a much sooner time frame. And so historically, when we begin budget presentations to the board, those occur or begin in the month of January. We're going to bring those much sooner to our board so that we can have those discussions. We're going to begin discussions with campuses and principals to look at their budgets, their needs, and make sure we begin prioritizing campus needs and instructional needs quickly, so that those aren't impacted when we begin discussing budget reduction strategies. We also know that as an administrative team, we are going to look at individual department budgets throughout the district between August and September, so that we could have some quick recommendations, even including those as part of our budget amendment that we will bring to the board in September or October, pending the finality of the legislative session and all the special sessions that we see. And then if we implement some of these deficit reduction strategies, you see the huge impact that it has with our out years, with our fiscal forecast. So we can bring our deficit for next year to 20 million versus the 53. The out years after that, 31 million, 24 million, and 27 million. And so what that does to our fund balance is you see that it stabilizes where we are as a district. So instead of only being compliant next school year, now we're compliant through the 24-25 school year, and we fall below our 20% threshold in 26-27. So you see the huge impact that reducing our overall expenditures over the next several years can have. So one of the highlights, I want to highlight the importance of the work that's to come, and this is going to happen in future years and next year. But one of the things that I want to make sure the board understands is we're going to have to make some tough decisions. The budget that we are proposing, the deficit budget, is a one-year deficit. So we have the understanding that, yes, we needed to make some really tough decisions with compensation increases because we saw the large number of vacancies in the district. We saw teachers leaving the profession. We saw the inflation costs just continue to increase. The cost of living in Austin is one of the highest costs in the area, and so we knew as a district we needed to address compensation. And so we've made an aggressive move this year. Next year, the focus will be on reducing overall spending so that we can continue to provide compensation increases, because you can't just give that on a one-year cycle and then stop for future years, because then you begin falling behind. And so this slide just shows historically when you adopt a budget, you try to adopt a budget with a worst case scenario. So the numbers that you saw before you, the $53 million deficit, that's what we are projecting as a worst case scenario. Historically, we've ended the budget much better than originally adopted, and so that's what these numbers show. In the 21-22 school year, we finished with a $32 million surplus. This next year, we are projecting to, this current school year, we're projecting to end the year with an $8 to $10 million surplus. So that positions us to really be aggressive next year with our compensation increase. But then again, we also know that we next have work to do with our deficit reduction strategies. And then this summarizes the investments that we have made as a district as part of this budget. And so, again, looking at special ed bilingual stipends, we've invested $8 million in that area. The budget priorities compensation increases, $56 million. General Marshall will be a campus that we will open next year, so that comes at a cost of almost $3 million. Looking at economically disadvantaged and emergent bilingual weights, $6.3 million. And of course, additional ed diags and LSSPs in the special ed department, $6.2 million. And so overall, we are looking at $89 million investment as part of this budget for a $53 million deficit. The next slide shows some opportunities that we have to reduce the budget if the board so chooses to adopt a smaller deficit. And so in order for us to do that, because we don't know the final outcome of the legislative process, we would delay decisions with some of our investments until we know what the finality is with the legislature, which would happen hopefully in September. And so some of the areas that we could look at in delaying, we're not saying that we're not going to do it, again, depending on what happens at the legislature. We know that we could save 6 FTEs with General Marshall Middle School because the FTEs that we proposed included a full campus. And so because this is a brand new campus, we know that we could reduce that number by 6 teaching units. Research and Evaluation Department, we could hold off on that department until we know the finality of the legislative session. We could delay the creation of the Ombudsman's Office, the expansion of Literacy First, and of course paper report cards. And so that would bring in about a $2.46 million reduction in our overall expenditures. So if we delayed these items, we would be looking at proposing a budget with a deficit of $49.9 million. So basically those are some of the options that we present to the board, whether we adopt a $53 million deficit or because of what we now know is occurring at the legislature, look at a $49.9 million deficit. And so, of course, the biggest #1 priority was looking at compensation. And so we really made an aggressive move this year. It's really, I believe, taking effect already pretty quickly. And so we've been able to hire many of the vacancies. One of the quick areas that I saw how this has impacted the district is we had a budget presentation in Spanish. And so we usually have about 15 participants. And when we presented our proposed budget to our Spanish community, we had over 70 participants on that call. And so many of the questions that were asked were twofold. One is how soon will the bond projects begin, which they're excited about the bond projects because it impacts their communities. So it was exciting to see that. And then the other was how can I become an Austin ISD employee? So that was a huge plus, and that really brought some hope that we are making a difference with this compensation package that we have passed. Again, a huge investment in our employees. We needed to move in that direction. They are the backbone of this district, and so we really needed to make sure that we took care of our employees in this district. And then, of course, we base this budget on a flat enrollment growth. So that's where you see our enrollment, 73,700. We left it flat over the next several years. Our recapture payment continues to grow Next year, $940 million. The year after that, we project it to be over $1 billion. And so without any major increases to the basic allotment this legislative session, we will continue to see these challenges that you see in this graph before you. And then, of course, we continue to monitor our administrative cost ratio. We do know that for the 21-22 school year, we were above the TEA recommendation in what they like to see districts spend with administrative costs. And those costs include both Function 41 and 21 campus support type expenditures. For the 23-24 proposed budget, we are projecting that we will fall below that threshold, which is very important. I know our board really wants us to monitor these expenditures to make sure that we are below the TEA threshold. So we are projecting that we do come in below that threshold next year. And then, of course, when you look at our budget as a dollar, we continue to send more than half of that dollar to the state. So $940 million next year. And one of the biggest expenditures that we have with the remaining funds that we have to operate as a district is, of course, with our staff and teacher compensation. So we continue to invest 87% of our budget in compensation, which we're proud of that percentage. It's one of the higher percentages in Central Texas, but again, it shows our commitment to our employees. And then the next two slides break up our budget into our proposed expenditures by function, which you see here. Of course, the biggest portion of our budget is invested in instruction, with the exception of recapture that goes back to the state. And so this basically breaks down where we spend our funds in different functions. The next slide breaks it down by program intent code. And so that's basically broken down by basic education instruction, special education, career and tech, early childhood, dyslexia, bilingual education. So it's just a different way of looking at how we spend our budget. There are more detailed information on the numbers with the attachments that we have included in the attachments. And then when you look at our tax rate, again, because of tax rate compression, we continue to reduce our overall tax rates. Again, next year, 92.66, so under $1. When we were looking at the bond program, we were projecting 96 cents for next year. So we are below what we told our voters. And that number will continue to decrease because of tax rate compression. Of course, we do know that there is a battle between the governor and the lieutenant governor in the state. And so there's a difference in philosophies. One side, the lieutenant governor is concentrating on the homestead exemption, and the other argument is from our governor, who's concentrating on appraisal caps, 5% appraisal caps. And so that remains to be finalized, and we'll see what that or how that impacts our overall tax rate for next year. Worst case scenario, we would adopt our budget in September, or adopt our tax rate in September with a lower tax rate than that 92.66 that you see, depending on the outcome of that process. And then, of course, Trustee Boswell really highlighted the legislative considerations that have occurred, that have passed. Property tax relief, that's still being argued at the legislative level, as is school funding and vouchers. And so we continue to watch that closely. One of the things that's not talked about, and this is why I said earlier that it's been a disappointing legislative session for public education. And so the state came into the legislative session with a $33 billion surplus. One of the numbers that's frequently not talked about is the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund currently has $27 billion. So when you add those two numbers together, they were looking at a $60 billion surplus. And so when you look at that number and compare that to a $5 billion investment to education, taking away the vouchers, it's very minimal. $50 increase to the basic allowance versus what it would take to catch up to inflation, $900 to $1,000. And so what that would do if it remains in effect is, of course, districts are going to have to make tough decisions throughout the state. And so I've contacted several of our urban districts throughout the state they are also looking at some large deficits. But again, this is where we stand. They also are looking at everything that they can do to retain their employees. And so our employees, again, are our backbone. And so we have to make a decision now. We couldn't wait to see the outcome of the legislative session. Otherwise, we'd start losing employees pretty quickly to the suburbs or leaving the profession in general. So I will open it up to questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Trustees, any questions, comments? Yes, Trustee Boswell.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Ramos. I want to start by thanking everyone who was involved in shaping this for keeping the focus on the people in our district, not only the people who work for the district, but keeping the dollars as close to the classroom and as close to our students as we can, the majority of our dollars. And I know we're paying for, teachers, librarians, counselors, custodians, food service workers, transportation, so many of the things that impact our students' experience every day and their ability to learn and thrive. So thank you for that. As we're making very hard choices, I think those are the hard choices we've heard loud and clear that we need to be making. So thank you for that. Also want to thank you for the choice to budget conservatively. As I talk to trustees in other parts of the state, not every district has approached it this way. I think there were some hopes that people treated as maybe more solid than we did, and I really it's a hard way to budget, but I think in this moment it was exactly the right way to budget. So it's better to than having to cut in this moment to hope that we end up with more eventually. So thank you for that. I want to ask about on slide 7 that $6 million assumption that you're making. And whether that is reflected in the deficit. I'll wait till you get back there. You have a lot of slides, thank you. This at the top, the very top line on the revenue strategies, whether that $6 million assumption is baked into the expected deficit or not.
So the $53 million deficit or the $49.9 million, depending on which direction we move in, that is not included. So we, again, assumed and really calculated our budget based on current year funding. And so that would be an opportunity if we do receive additional funding to reduce our deficit. So the $53 million does not include that $6 million additional state aid.
The deficit assumes zero.
Zero.
Okay,
So
thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for the administrative cost ratio. I really appreciate that, and I know that's a lagging indicator. It'll take a while to show up in our first rating, but really appreciate that. And also with our first rating, knowing the impact of paying our recapture on time, the unusual impact that it has on our district, and not some other districts, but not every other district. I know you were really involved with advocacy for adjusting that so we weren't being penalized for paying on time. And thank you for your work on that. It didn't pay off, but there's always another session, so thank you for that. I appreciate you working in the projection of bond savings into the trajectory of savings over time, and I would really, that was such a strong part of the promise that we made to our community as we worked to pass the bond. I think it would be really valuable to me, and I think to some people in our community, to have that year-over-year projected savings as that begins to come into focus as we're talking about our budget. Not only at our next meeting before we vote on it, but just continuing to update our community on that. And I appreciate that it's baked in, but I would love to also see it pulled out year over year so we can really show our community what that will look like as the years go on. So thank you for that. I assume any potential HB3 cost for additional staff for security and for work that would need to be done. I know it includes improvements, safety improvements to physical buildings, is not baked into this yet.
One of the opportunities that we have is, of course, we included safety security dollars in our 2022 bond program, which many districts don't have that opportunity. And so that is how we feel. We're pretty confident we can take care of the new requirements, especially the panic buttons in every classroom.
Yeah. And I want to say thank you to everyone who was who worked on our bond planning for really prioritizing that. I know the bond was being developed when the tragedy happened in Uvalde, and it was a very unfortunate coincidence, but one that I think has set us up to have more secure buildings and have the funds we need to take care of that. So thank you for that. And I know that there is a potential, I think, $5 million cost if we need to hire extra staff to meet that need. And I know we'll be talking about it more later, but just want to be sure we continue to talk about that. And I know we'll have another chance to talk about that before we vote. So those are my big conversations. And then I would love to, as we talk about the vacancy savings, really consider the need and the impact and the cost. And I would love to see a dollar estimate on it on one-to-one devices for our youngest students. Do we necessarily need one-to-one devices for our kindergartners, first graders, whatever our academic department feels is most appropriate, and however they're being used on campuses, whether there's an option to go back to some shared computers at those earlier grades when they're doing less time sitting in front of a screen, and what that might save us as a recurring cost.
And I know our technology department is looking at those options.
Yeah, and I know that's a hardware cost and a software cost, and something that impacts the way our kids learn. So I would really appreciate, I'll look forward to hearing those numbers when they're available.
Trustee Boswell, is your expectation those numbers would be presented prior to the board approving the budget? Or I just want to make sure I'm clear as to when you get them, because that's going to be
I do not need that before we approve the budget, but as we continue to, I know this is a slow motion, long-term conversation, and really having that as one thing that's considered. I know that's a big recurring cost, and I know we have academic experts who work for the district who have alongside our technology experts who can take a look at that, and I just would be interested in knowing how that might factor in as a cost savings as we continue to look at budgets, amendments, savings. I know this is something we'll all be working on together for quite a while, I believe. So thank you.
Trustee Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos and Mr. Segura, for the presentation, and thank you for your calm demeanor in the midst of what seems somewhat crisis-like. But I appreciate, again, like you've used the word worst case scenario, and usually when we hear that term, it's not, we don't land there. And I appreciate that you created that space for us to land there, knowing that this could happen. And so I feel confident that we can get through this, but I want to thank you for that. This is a very minor thank you, but it's a very big thank you for a very minor thing. I want to thank you for updating the summaries on the PIT codes with the state allotment amount, the total amount, in addition to the required spend. So thank you for that, following up on that request from last time. I do have a question, Mr. Segura, just around the idea behind the potentially delaying the ombudsperson and the DRE. I'm just wondering, are those at this time still proceeding full speed ahead, but has not been hired yet, therefore it's still something we could go back on? Or is it actually is the process being held at this time?
The process is not being held. One of the reasons that Dr. Hawley is not here is because she's actually out visiting with a school district to understand best practices regarding implementation. So no, it is continuing on. We've actually looked at different ways to budget it and kind of what makes the most sense, but we are not stopping at this point. But we have not hired that individual. Right. Therefore,
it's a potential. Okay,
correct.
I appreciate that, and I do think, again, I think DRE is a potentially money-saving piece because it helps us to truly evaluate the effectiveness of the money we're spending. And I also think the ombudsperson is just particularly the ombudsperson to support special education is an essential component of meeting the needs of our students and families regarding an area that we have as a high priority. So I'm hopeful that those that will leave the potential list soon and become we have those in place list, hopefully. And I will just, I will bring up again, it is hard to see those as potential savings when I'm looking at $500,000 in excess funding for art and music. Again, I am in full support of fully funding art and music. I'm not in support of excess funding for art and music in a way that creates inequities around the district. So I'm hopeful that can go on our list of potential savings for the following year as we reevaluate the plan for special areas and for creating planning time for teachers. I know the equity fund that was created last year had turned into something else, a different name, and then is that fully gone now, or is that somewhere in this budget? Or is that a potential savings as well?
Yeah, so that is fully gone as potential savings. One of the things that we did do is we invested in communities and schools to expand the program and take that cost away from the schools. So schools historically were required to take that out of their either local funds or Title I funds. We as a district have taken that over since it's a district-wide program, and that alleviates funding at the campus level.
Outstanding. Okay, yeah, I think that's a much more concrete pathway towards equity than the previous incarnation. Thank you. I also want to commend the attention paid to the administrative cost ratio, both because of where it appears on our first rating, but also because of what that represents as far as where we, who's doing the work in the district and where we most value it. And I am fully in support of our administrative structure existing because that does make the system work. But the ratio is there for a reason. I am confused, though, when I look at the numbers that show that the percentage is going down, and yet, if I'm reading it correctly, the projected amount for this year is actually $2 million less than what the budget amount is for next year. Am I reading that incorrect?
Yes, and much of that...
Yes, I'm reading it incorrectly, or yes, that is the case?
That's the case,
okay.
And much of that is because of the vacancies that we've experienced as a district. And so that has allowed us to really look at budget savings. And so in looking at also the raises that are taking effect next year, that goes into effect on the denominator side, and so that affects the overall ratio of the district.
Okay. So again, while paying attention to fully staffing our central office and our campus administration to be able to move the work and to bring in the expertise we need in those areas, I do hope that the cost ratio percentage starts to go down based on the actual number going down.
Right.
But right now, that's not the case, right?
Partly it is not enough to make a large impact.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And you had mentioned that we're still pending on the impact of potential legislative action on property tax relief. You kind of left that as an unknown. Do you have a worst case or a best guess on what that could look like in terms of our budget?
So we're looking at a potential additional 7-cent reduction to our overall tax rate. And then right now the unknown is the homestead exemption, what would happen.
Yeah, do you have a worst case like that would be X million dollars? That would be an, for addition.
So anything that has to do with the property tax relief has really no impact to the district because we do not receive any additional funding from that or reduced funding as well.
Oh, so the worst case is not really a bad thing in that case for us.
It's a benefit to our community and our taxpayers, but we as a district do not benefit with any of that legislation.
Right. Okay, nor do we suffer.
Right, nor do we suffer.
Perfect. And my last question, I'm new to this from the board perspective on looking at the budget, but are we receiving more? Like this still seems like a summary, but it seems like a rather small amount of paper for a $2 billion budget. Are we going to be receiving, or do we have access to a more detailed look at where the dollars are going?
Reports that we've historically included with our budget proposal are the attachment that you see. If there are additional requirements or additional numbers that you'd like to see, we can produce those. But for the most part, what we've included are historically what we've either included in prior years or requests from the board where we've updated some of our numbers.
So when I've seen the campus by campus budget allocations, is that something that was by request, or where would that?
That was by request, and those will appear on our website.
Okay, so I will defer, but is it possible for us to discuss in executive session just to get a clear idea of the governance role in terms of level of detail of looking at the budget, so that I have a better understanding? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other trustees have questions? Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Thank you so much for this really detailed report. There's so much to consider here. I'm looking at the slide 9, which has the deficit reduction strategies. And I think the part here, so it's good to have this laid out. The part that's, you know, a little bit concerning is that the first three items on here are kind of like iffy, right? Like we don't know. It really depends on the legislature. Well, the first two depend on the legislature. And then the enrollment, we don't know. We know that the team is working really hard on that. The only thing that we really do have control over is our own deficit reduction expenditure strategies. So I'm kind of zeroing in on that, which is $15 million. I think, and it's interesting that we have $15 million listed as a deficit reduction strategy for the upcoming year, which is the same year that we're adopting a budget for. So the very conservative, you know, side of my brain is, why don't we just build that into the budget that we're approving in 2 weeks?
So part of that is because we want to be conservative with our numbers. And so, for example, when you look at vacancy savings, that is a projection. And so we know that depending on the conversations that we have as a district, we can be more aggressive, but those conversations have not occurred. And so we really don't have a clear picture of the direction and the areas that we want to look at with regards to reducing positions in certain areas. So until those conversations happen, just to be conservative, we're not building that into the budget, but we know it's a direction that we can take as a district and have an impact over the next fiscal year.
Okay. So I actually, and maybe I'm, okay, so for example, we have evaluate contracts and software costs, right? But that's not, is that reflected in the actual budget that we would be approving? Like the savings piece, like is it $1.5 million less than what we already need? Or are we saying, hey, once the school year starts in the coming months, then we're going to figure out where we're going to cut $1.5 million from software?
That's correct. So the $53 million deficit does not include us cutting the current software and contracts that we have in place. But as a district, this would commit us to really dive into those contracts and softwares and look at where we can find potential savings.
Yeah, and Ed, if I could elaborate, I think one of the challenges that we have is we as an organization know that there's opportunity, right? We know where it exists, but we don't, it's not granular or detailed enough to where we can tie it to an actual expenditure. Because what you would typically do is take the 1.5 million and then tie it to costs so that the net of it all would be reflected in the budget. So because we do know that there's an opportunity to sunset some of these softwares and even hardwares as we move to the ERP system, the commitment is to evaluate them and then bring back an amended budget in September. The fear that I have is that if we just say we're going to tie it to a specific line item and it's the wrong one, or we do it without really getting input from the entire system, then we could be in a tough position. And that's what's happened in the past. So I'm really trying to kind of balance this, acknowledging that if we would have done this over again, we probably should have started back in November opposed to February. But that's the reason it shows this way in the presentation.
That's helpful to know. So this is the fifth budget cycle that I'm sitting through. I don't recall as having, and maybe my recollection is not correct. I don't recall as having it presented to us like this before, but am I wrong? Because, I mean, you were here last year. Like, in the past, if we were planning on making reductions, it would just be in the budget that we approve, rather than having, approving a budget that's...
So last year, when we adopted our budget, we had already made those reductions throughout the last fiscal year, and so we knew we had a hard number that we can count on and rely on.
Okay.
And so that's where that year, if you remember, we reduced about 600 positions. So those decisions had already been made, so we could build that into the budget. This year, when we look at vacancy savings through attrition, We don't know what those numbers look like, so we don't want to include them in our ultimate budget that we pass.
And just to reinforce that point, I would say that the last time that we went through that process, the approach was to reduce all budgets by a similar amount, right? 10% across the board. The challenge that creates in an organization like ours is not all departments are equal, right? And there are some departments that actually might need an increase, right? Specifically school leadership or academics. And so for us, that approach, I don't think is the correct approach. The preferred approach would be to say, we believe there's this opportunity. Let us dive into the work, especially as we are through the ERP system and have a true record of all of our expenses, and then reduce and then come back with amended budget. But I think that's why it's different, and we do know that that approach last time actually had some adverse impacts to the system, meaning that we made reductions without really understanding the impact to our organization.
For sure. And so I think, and so that's helpful. And so I think I guess my question is it possible to put in our actual budget that we're going to approve at a very top level, like with not so much specificity, some of these things that we do have control over? Like, yeah, we don't really know how much attrition we're going to have. So that's cool. That doesn't need to be, that would be weird to build it into the budget, but something about maybe under the software line item, could we just reduce that by $1.5 million? Like right now, like I'd rather cut it now and then add money back in rather than have a bigger budget and then be forced to
So the challenge with that is we would have to know which software, which contracts we were going to eliminate.
You can't, you have to identify it at the granular level.
The specific items. Yes.
Okay. All right.
So even though we present a summary to the board, it's all tied into an actual expenditure within our budget.
Which is a good practice. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just saying, yeah, we really do need to, we are really going to have to cut some stuff. And I appreciate your thoughtful approach to that. And when will that process start of like engagement and all of that?
Well, so on slide, it's page 12, but I think it's slide 8. We have a draft reduction timeline. And so what you'll see is that in September, October, we will be bringing back an amended budget. The idea is that amended budget would reflect known opportunities, right? So we've spent time with the budget for the last multiple months, and we'll know a good amount, especially after the ERP comes online. So the idea is the first kind of pass at these opportunities would be done by the administration. At the same time, we'll be building up a advisory committee or a group that will then kind of progress the work past that point. But and so you can see that here in October, begin sessions with budget committees. So, but the first opportunity would be in September, and that would be off known opportunities based on work we've already completed.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. And then I did have another question. Oh yeah. Okay. Looking at slide 12. So these are proposed investments. And oh wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Well, I guess slide 12 and 13. So here, this is the list of all the proposed investments that are, that we've discussed. But my understanding is that the ones on page 13 are actually not going to be in the budget yet. Those would come back to us.
If we as a district decide to delay on what's on slide 13, then that would drop our proposed budget to $49.9 million.
Okay. So here's what I would like to do, and I would love for the board to really to weigh in on some of this. This is kind of like the nitty-gritty of this kind of stuff. This is our chance to really think about our scorecard, okay? And I want us to really think about the items on slide 12. Are these things that are going to move the needle on reading, on the performance of our SPED students, and all the stuff that we've, that we've really been talking about? And are the items that are selected for the delay, which I'm totally a fan of, I think we should not put in the budget stuff that, is not the highest priority. And so things like the paper report cards, I could get behind. I could even probably get behind the ombudsman's office being delayed. But I really, when I think about our scorecard discussions every month, looking at, hey, what are the outliers and what do we really know is moving the needle for our students and their academic achievement? We're not going to ever get the answer to that until we have that research and evaluation department. So to me, that is something that I would love, I really feel like needs to be in the budget for next year. I mean, all of these things are important, but the one, if I'm really thinking about our scorecard and that's driving our budget decisions, personally, and I would love to hear from all of you guys as well. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I do feel like that needs to be elevated because there's no one who we can ask to really give us a definitive answer. Is this curriculum effective? It's all anecdotal. And until we can actually get some numbers that demonstrate effectiveness of our programs, like we're gonna not make very well data-informed decisions for our students. So that's what I would say. Now, but then there'd have to be a trade-off. So we'd have to look at slide 12 and be like, what can we take from here and move it to, like, what can we swap it with? And I have some ideas. I don't want to say them out loud because but I think that's something that I would really ask the administration to think about if that's the direction that the board would want to go in. But there is at least one or two things in here that I'm not sure would have as much of an impact on student academic success as reinstating that research and evaluation department immediately. So I'll leave it at that, but would welcome any of my colleagues to comment. Yes.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and I want to second the idea behind making sure that everything in the budget is based on that it's going to address the needs. And I want to be careful as a board member not to pick pet projects that I want to see and then have the budget bend towards that away from things that our teachers and principals and central office staff are recommending as the best levers for us to achieve greater results for our students. So even, I'm a big fan of, literacy first, but if that's not the lever that's going to move our reading forward, then that is something, that could wait. On the other hand, if it is the lever that is going to move reading forward, I don't want to see it on the potential savings because that would be directly impacting our priorities. So I really do just want to reiterate again, please help us make sure that this budget is driving student performance and outcomes for families and students so that we're supporting that. But I would also reiterate to President Singh that I do think that when we're thinking about our outcomes for special education, that beyond the scorecard measure that previously existed around just the performance on academic tests, that there are so many other factors and outcomes that we expect from special education when it comes to truly differentiating for students and making sure that their IEPs are being met. And I think that we, whether it's a scorecard measure or not, we need to ensure that our families feel supported, that their differentiated needs of their students are being met. And I think the ombudsperson for special education in particular is a key piece of that. So I just want to, but again, I will listen to the experts if you tell me otherwise. But that is something I would still like to retain a huge focus on, because I think that that would allow our families to have their voices heard around the aspects of their child's education that may not be reflected on did they pass this one test or not.
Thank you. Any other trustees? Trustee Boswell.
I really appreciate the conversation about making sure our investments are paying off and looking at, as we're considering cutting and input into what is a very painful situation, being thoughtful about what we spend. And I think to the points that have been made, if you look at the ombudsperson's office, for example, even at an unweighted student allotment, per student allotment of the 6160, and we know we get more than that a little bit, for different reasons. If that helps us keep fewer than 40 students in the district, that pays for itself. And so I think where we're spending in ways that will continue, I think our research and evaluation department, similarly, if we are able to do good work with that help us serve students better, that help us retain students, and it pays for itself, that's an important thing to consider. And I would really love perspective on a lot of these investments, on kind of how you see that paying off. I think the Literacy First, my understanding is that the program is intended to pay for additional people on campuses. It's really a capacity building within our own staff as much as anything. And, knowing exactly how many students that $1.3 million would serve, and looking at the Literacy First success, I don't know if they can share data with us about, if we're able to serve X number more students, how that compares to their program, and X percent of students go from, not on grade level to on grade level to reading successfully. So we know really what that means in terms of who that will impact and how. That would be extremely helpful, I think, to help decide if that's a reasonable thing to go into deficit for, something we're willing to take that leap of faith for, or make that decision to spend, have deficit spending for or not. So I think that is how I'm looking at it, is really where can we spend that might pay for itself, and really what is that meaningful impact. And I do appreciate putting the scorecard goals beside each of these proposed investments and really tying it to our work, or kind of marrying our governance work and with the scorecard and the budgeting together, to really help make sure it's reflecting what we have prioritized. So thank you very much for that. I think it makes it a much more meaningful conversation.
Trustee Whitley Chu.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Lynn, for, bringing up just, this might look like, some of these might look like they save us money, but cost us too much. And so, like, looking at Literacy First, that is, literacy is a huge focus on our scorecard and just on children's outcomes in life. Like, if our kids can read, they can learn to do anything. I'm a math teacher, but my students could never pass the STAR if they cannot read. They cannot pass the Math STAR if they cannot read. And, this is an evidence-based program from the University of Texas, where the tutors work one-on-one daily with students. And this will really, I think it will help our teachers with their working conditions. All teachers want to have that one-on-one time with students and sometimes don't get to do it. And I think also it will help with, we have the highest number of referrals for special education services. And sometimes it might just be that a student needed, they won't end up not qualifying for services after they waited, but they still need instruction. And if they are learning to read and just, getting that quality instruction from the beginning without having to qualify or they don't actually qualify for services, lots of kids just need some extra tutoring. And I wouldn't want to see that go by the wayside. So I appreciate you talking about the Ombudsman office and enrollment, and our parents feeling supported and treated fairly and listened to. And I'm really curious of seeing which of our programs are worth the investment with the research and evaluation department.
Yes, Trustee Sabata.
I too agree that the Ombudsman is one that is a priority because of the special education that we need to hold ourselves accountable to in the situation that we're in right now. That's just, to me, is a non-negotiable. That Ombudsman would not only do that, there would be other things we could also use that office for. But I think with our partners like API, who has a lot of partners working with us, there are so many volunteers, mentors, that are right now, I think, in silos, that we could really strategically figure out how to make sure literacy is happening, how some of these things could happen with the existing partners, so that we could save some money. They're out there trying to do it, and so I think the way it's happening now, there isn't a real hand-on, we don't have a real hand-on, is it helping our student growth in anything? We have a lot of volunteers that are very committed, and they come back every year, but we have to have some kind of menu. We need to have something that have expectation for everything that we invest and partner with, that there is a way to measure student outcomes. Because currently there's, I think, that's not a true statement for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other trustees? Did you have something, Trustee Foster? No. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention was just a thought. And I don't know, I'm sure some of the other trustees are thinking about this too, but, you know, as we're looking at some of the new positions, which are totally, like, I'm 100% committed. I think we're all 100% committed to compensation. It's too late to do anything about that. Like that's a must, you know, the SPED stipends, that's a must, and the bilingual stipends. Like, there's things in here that like jump out at me, like that's an absolute must. And I'm wondering, first of all, would it be helpful to the staff to ask trustees to kind of go through another Excel sheet exercise? Because is it too late in that? Are we too late in the process to, you know? And the reason it sounds like we're kind of making last minute adjustments, but it's because the legislature hasn't done what it's supposed to do. Okay, I'm just going to put that out there. You know, we really thought we would at least get $6 million, which is half, I know, what the experts told us we would get. We were being conservative, but apparently, you know, like we're being forced to do this because the legislature has decided not to use any of its $30 billion in excess to increase the basic allotment. So this is the pain that we're feeling right now to the public. And it is like, I feel physical pain here. Thinking about, because with each of these line items is a child. And as Trustee Whitley Chu said, it's like reading. Yes, if we're not teaching our kids to read, how are they going to succeed in life? We're sending them straight to prison. A lot of them. And so, like, anyway. But the other question I want us to ask ourselves as we're thinking about some of these new positions is thinking about some of the other positions we've lost in the last year or two, like graduation coaches. I've heard so much about graduation coaches. And so we have to ask ourselves, is our counselors or athletic trainers or whatever, pick an essential area teacher that's not shared, is that going to move the needle more than a graduation coach would have, or a DRE department? So we have to look at these things in relationship to each other, not just what we see on this paper, but other historical cuts that we've made as well that maybe we haven't had a chance to talk about as much. So I don't know how, interim Superintendent Segura, you guys are what the next step would be, but you know, tell us what you think would be a good way to get our input in a efficient way.
I will start the conversation. I think that the opportunity does exist for the board to provide feedback and perhaps force rank the prioritizations around these items. I would be cautious about introducing an item that hasn't been kind of built up to this level, because these got here through work sessions, through community input. Sure. I mean, it's been a lot into it. So I don't know that I would go and introduce something that hasn't been discussed for the last several months, but when it comes to ranking what's here on both of these sheets and figuring out, okay, what are the highest priorities from the board, from each trustee, having that information come to Ed Ramos, our CFO, and then that would help inform our final recommendation, and then obviously I'll always have the final vote. But I think there's opportunity for that. We don't have to upload for a little bit longer. I would ask that we receive that input probably in the next 3 days, probably by Tuesday close of business. We can create a tool just like we did last time and send it to y'all. And then it'd be very simple, just kind of, toggle up and down, and then we'll take that feedback and make an adjustment appropriately. I think that would work.
Yeah.
But my only caution would be about going down a road that hasn't been.
Are you talking about making adjustments to the budget that we will vote on in 2 weeks?
Well, so right now I think the question becomes, are there things that are going to be delayed? Like we have a little table here for delayed. And if there's feedback from the trustees about what might be considered for delay, right now we're not hearing consensus from the board to make a recommendation to actually come back with a modified budget.
For additional delayed items?
That's the way I would.
Or swaps.
Or swaps,
whatever.
correct. That's what it would be. I don't, that's kind of what I was thinking, Trustee Foster.
So, one of the things that this board and our community, where we've worked towards, is increased community engagement, increased transparency, increased thoughtfulness in our actions and activities. And the ledge is what the ledge is. I don't get too excited about moves within a couple of weeks if we have the opportunity to amend the budget in September. So I would be interested in, it's not kicking the can for the foundations. The overwhelming majority of the budget is pretty well set. We had a vision. You all, with fidelity, acted upon it. I have 150% faith in your fiscal stewardship, or the fiscal stewardship of the district, and so I'm comfortable where we are, and fully appreciating what you're saying about some tough decisions coming. I don't want to make the tough decisions in 2 weeks. I would rather approve what is before us with an understanding that when the dust settles from legislative actions and special sessions and whatever they're going to do, that we move towards the amendments that need to be made. So that's I guess that's where I am on that.
So I have a question, because I'm sitting here thinking about, okay, well, how do I manage my budget? And there was a particular scenario earlier this calendar year where I was mentally banking on a certain amount, didn't happen, and then I was like, right, had to rewind. That's on a tiny scale compared to an organization of AISD's side and all the people and all the students and all the families that are impacted. So, for real, like, is it better, how do I say this? From a business operation standpoint, is it better to just pass the budget as it is and then cut once the dust settles, or is it helpful to make an adjustment to items that haven't for example, you don't have a person in the ombudsperson position, right? So then therefore, is it helpful to then take things off the table?
So one of the suggestions I may provide is that let's say we leave some of these items in our budget proposal. So let's say it's a $53 million deficit. Even delaying that decision, it's still in the budget, but let's say the ombudsman, instead of hiring them in July, we hire them in August, September, but we're still moving forward in that direction. That still provides some budget savings. It's not a lot. But we also commit ourselves to really diving into our budget, knowing the decision that we made or we're going to make on the 22nd, regardless of what budget we propose and pass. That's really going to guide us as an administrative team to really dive into the budget and say, look, the board really wanted the research and evaluation department, the ombudsman's office, the literacy first. So those dollar amounts, where are we going to find them? Because now we're prioritizing those areas, and there are, in a budget our size, there are opportunities for us to reduce dollars in other areas. And so that's what we've been talking about all this time. Prioritize where we want to spend our dollars, and then find areas where we can reduce the overall budget. And so that's kind of the process that we followed all this time.
Yeah. So to that extent, I would be in favor of any exercise or hands-on support that would be helpful from the board to the administration, so that y'all have a sense of like, okay, what can we move and what are the things that are immovable?
So Trustee Lugo, maybe that's how the information that's provided from the board would help us in planning, not necessarily to amend the current budget, but also acknowledging that we're going to start this work. I mean, it's already kind of started. Yeah. Because it'll help us focus, I mean, honestly, and figure out what number do we have to get to and when do we have to get to it to come back with an amended budget. Just acknowledging there'll be multiple budgets, because we're going to have another one in January, correct? Yeah, so.
Yeah, we can have a monthly if we need to, but.
That's right. That's right.
So just to clarify what I was proposing before, and I think I just want to make sure this was understood, was not to think about those big cuts that we're making, the $15 million in cuts, and what programs and software we're going to cut. It's literally just, are we in agreement on what is on the short list of delayed proposed amendment investments? And I know that, like, and I don't think we have really, as a board, vetted that yet. I know I've had a couple of conversations, and I was like, hey, I'm willing to, do a couple of things that were my sort of favorites and put those. But my expectation was that there would be other stuff too. It wasn't just the ones that I put forth, right? Like, and so, I have to be able to defend to the community that, like, if we were to adopt this, I have to really be able to defend. Yes, we felt that, let's say, athletic trainers was going to move the needle in a more powerful way than a research and evaluation department. I'm not sure if I could say that. I know that they're both really important. I just don't know if I can say that, because so maybe I need to be brought along a little bit more in what some of these community conversations have been around the athletic trainers. But right now I haven't seen that, we have to, because people are going to ask us these questions. And so I would probably really want to have a better understanding of some of these things. I mean, same with the essential area, the not shared essential areas teachers. I mean, I know our campuses are already far along in their hiring and planning next year, but we have to really, like, that's, how much is it? That's $500,000. Is that going to move the needle more than an ombudsman office? I don't know. And that's, yeah, like, I hear some whispers up here. These are real, I mean, this is our duty as a board, where we really embody the community's values and what our constituents value and what we think is going to help move our scorecard. And so I appreciate the administration being willing to, just share with us. We're not talking about making big cuts. We're talking about just moving things, shifting things from one category to another. And I would love somewhere in there to also know how difficult it would be, because I know, like, I'm thinking about Ms. Hosek over there going, oh my God, we've already, like, hired these people. Like, tell us that too, so that we know that as well, because there are some positions that haven't been hired yet, so that's also a factor.
So it sounds like the approach that we were going to consider is still appropriate, because we're talking about what would be perhaps delayed, not taken off, but delayed. And then what we can do is also provide a space in the table for additional considerations. So if we are in fact already in the middle of hiring, or if we've already started some part of that cost, then we would note that as well. So you'd at least have that information. But to Ed's point, many of these, just the fact that, by the time summer hits, and 2 months pass, 20% of some of these costs would not be incurred. So there's always that kind of fluidity to this process, but we can absolutely do that, and perhaps if we can send it out Monday or over the weekend, we'll talk about that, and then get feedback by close of business Tuesday, I think we'll be in a good spot. And I agree, it's not going to be huge things, it's those minor pieces going back and forth.
Thank you. Oh, yes, Trustee Foster.
I guess as it sounds like we're wrapping this conversation, I'd just like to express appreciation for the ways in which, at least to my observation, the budgeting process lives into the vision that the board has set. Again, the transparency, the engagement, the thoughtfulness. You mentioned just offhand equality versus equity, and we've had past rounds, when I used to watch this stuff go, where there would be across the board cuts, which it's just not a good way to run your shop, to just say everybody's down 8%. And it caused more problems than it was worth sometimes. And you all are, to my observation, really thoughtful about where do we cut, where do we invest, where do we improve. Likewise, I'm deeply appreciative, and all the feedback I've gotten, community's deeply appreciated of our proactive investment in the human beings who are the lifeblood of the district. And I think it's like a game changer in a sense, where folks are feeling differently because they feel seen through, it's the commodification. It's one piece of the puzzle, but actually moving towards compensating folks in a humane way, going from 1350 to 16 to 20 over. That's such a dramatic increase for classified folk. And in your presentation, you mentioned that it can't be a one-time thing. We can't do a raise 1 year and then wait another 3, 4, 5 years and play catch-up over and over again. That even going forward, we need to figure out how to have compensation. I don't know if we're going to keep up with inflation, but have compensation and raises be an every year part of the conversation. And I think you've set the table, y'all have set the table very nicely in that regard as well. So even as we engage these difficult conversations that our president is making sure that we have, which is incredibly responsible and incredibly painful. So thank you for that, because we have to do it. But even as we are engaged in that conversation, I want to lift up in foreground and thank you all for the work that you have done.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed.
All right, you're off the hot seat now. Oh, there's more?
Oh,
okay,
sorry. Oh.
You're still on the hot seat. Sorry.
You're not actually on the hot seat. The
Sorry,
board
Ed.
is on the hot seat. But so you don't move in case we have a question. I don't think we will. Speaking from someone who's just kind of like, gone to kind of find out why things are on the board. I think the superintendent mentioned it, you've mentioned it, that the things that are currently in the budget have been worked, right? They've been worked in the community, they've been worked with the staff, and I think it's real important that in our consideration, we don't undo the work we've already done. And by that I mean, if a part of our organization has said, this is important to us, we have to value that. We have to figure out how to get those things that will help us move the needle on those other things. I don't want us to start saying in our minds, this might not move the needle academically, but does it move or does it work toward our goal of safety for our students, right? Or achievement in some other, because we say this all the time, it's more than academics, right? So we're looking at the whole child. So in looking at that, however we decide, and once I think you guys have that sort of consensus of what's next, that will help you. But again, when thinking about, I want to be real cautious in saying, This thing, I don't see it. Well, that's because we weren't there at that meeting, in that planning, in that group with those teachers or those coaches or the staff workers or whatever. So if anyone has, I would suggest to all of us, if we have a question about one particular item that's there and say, like you said, good question, bring me along, like help me. I think I always tell Jeremy, I'm teachable. Right? And Jeremy knows I'm teachable. I might not get it now, but if you show me, I can get it. That's the one thing I can do is learn. So I just want to encourage us with all the work that is done, that as we are looking to meet our goal, we don't sacrifice right for good or good for right, that we just try to hold that line, which is a really hard line to hold, right? Because we need to do it all. And we were hoping that our state felt the same way. That is not what happened. So yes, we are now having to make these really, really hard choices. So I just want to encourage the board, as we look, as we think, if you truly have, you're like, well, I don't see the value, then ask about the value. Because someone, somewhere, for it to get this far in this process, fought hard to get it in there. So we need to know why it's there. And then, again, if we can, move forward and then find those dollars. I mean, that's basically what I do every month. Honestly. It's like, we just trust that it will come. We can't do that in this organization, but with our budget, we can kind of have what we have and then amend later. Okay? Thank you.
I appreciate that. Bring us along.
All right, thank you, Ed.
Thank you. And great job to the whole team. Really appreciate it. Yes. By the way, Mr. Ramos, would you mind introducing who is here that's on your team?
Yes, so I have Adriana Cedillo, our Executive Director of Budget, sitting in the back. I don't know if Katrina's here. There she is.
Katrina Montgomery, thank
our
you.
Assistant Superintendent of Financial Services. These are the backbones of my number crunching.
Thank you.
So really appreciate that.
All right.
I'd also love to make sure we give Chief Hosak credit and her team for all the staffing being 87% of the budget, all the hard work they did to feed into what our financial team was able to do. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, next is what we're all here for, student achievement. So our next item is part of our commitment to discuss student achievement and have a presentation on scorecard items 1.1 and 1.2, special education growth, end of year measures of academic progress, and that's looking really at the MAP, reading and math. So Mr. Segura, would you please introduce this item?
Absolutely. We have Dr. Robinette, Assistant Superintendent of Special Education, will present on scorecard item 1.1 and 1.2. As you said, this is the end of year special education growth on the measure of academic performance, or MAP, in reading and math. Joining her tonight, we have Dr. Cherry Lee, Executive Director of Instructional Delivery and Inclusion, and Mr. Gilbert Hicks, Interim Chief of Schools. So with that, I'll hand it over to the team and take it on.
Okay, good evening, Interim Superintendent Segura and President Singh and members of the Board of Trustees. My name is Gilbert Hicks, and I am the Interim Chief of Schools, and I'd like to have my colleagues introduce themselves. Well, you just did that, so it's probably not necessary to do that again. So Jerry Lee and Drew Robinette. We're here to provide an update on Scorecard Goal 1. Students currently receiving special education services demonstrating achievement on state assessments in all grades, all subjects at the meets grade level will increase from 36% to 60% by August of 2026. Dr. Robinette will begin going through some of the slides with us and producing the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Good evening. Trustees, Drew Robinette, Assistant Superintendent for Special Education. Trustees, I'd like for you, as we get started, we're going to walk away with 3 things this evening, or 3 areas that we're going to touch on. First, we're going to look at the goal and progress measures for this year's recent performance of students receiving special education services relative to, we'll touch base on what the prior year for the taper, and then students within and across our district. Then the second part, we'll take a look at how these data are informing our ongoing improvement work in special education at the district level, part of which will link back to our recovery plan that you're familiar with. And then thirdly, we'll dive a little deeper into lessons that we're learning from student groups and campus practices that we can build upon across our system and determine how to strengthen those, and likewise where we need to provide areas of additional support. Thank you. So in this slide, our goal and progress measures for reading and math focus on growth for each student group as measured by the MAP assessment, which is available and given to our K through 8 students. Our end of year target, which is circled there for the 2022-23 school year, is 53% or more of students receiving special education services meeting or exceeding their their projected growth target in reading, and 56% in math. As you'll note in the progress monitoring report that you also have, we're making progress toward those goals, but we have not yet met our target. I did want to qualify something as I'm continuing on, just as a point of notice. I hear some papers. There was an update to the attachment that was provided. I want to make sure that the trustees have that and the public is aware of that as well if there are any questions. Thank you. So you've seen our data and state trends for the past 3 years. In general, we have had stayed pretty stable with the state, both for our state and for our district. There was a bit of a COVID dip, and then there's been some recovery for all student groups. Those students in our district receiving special education, slightly exceeding the state in the 21-22 school year relative to the overall state performance in that area. Nevertheless, given that, we know that we have high expectations for our students. To Trustee Kaufman's point earlier, beyond state performance and testing, strengthening and creating more robust programs and supports for them. And we know that they're general education students first, and that student-centered educational programming is the key for us to intentionally plan for and design learning for all learners that really embodies the vision of an inclusive district, and specifically for our children receiving special education services. So in reviewing the end-of-year data for students receiving those services, you'll see a modest increase in the percent of students who met their growth target for both reading and math from middle of the year to end of the year. However, you'll notice that we did not yet meet our end-of-year target by 8% in both of those subject areas. Thank you. So let's take a deeper dive at the reading progress goal for goal progress measure 1.1. The reading goal progress data show that the all student group and special education group, all students meaning all students, are both performing below the projected target for this year. While 45% of students receiving special education services met the end of year growth target, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that's 8 percentage points below the 2023 target for end of year. Of one additional note, just because it's a slightly busier table and likewise included in your board monitoring report, there are 2 new student groups that were included at a prior meeting that was requested by our accountability team, and that's Asian and 2 or more races or students have been added for analysis, and they'll be included going forward as well. For math, 53% of students, all K through 8 students, met their projected growth target, and 48% of students receiving special education services met their end-of-year growth target. Both are likewise shy of the target for math goal progress measures that you have set for our students receiving special education services in scorecard goal 1 with these growth and progress measures, and again, 8% from the end-of-year target. So a deeper dive allows us to look at student groups of our students receiving special education services and helps us to understand where that overall 8 percentage point gap from our end of year target sort of lies, and provides direction for us for continuing and improving, refining our district improvement efforts for all students at that, especially with that disaggregated look. Likewise, for mathematics, we provide the same for mathematics with a deeper dive into student groups receiving special education services. And again, this is how that is distributed and laid out from us being 8% from that end of year target by student group. So our ongoing special education recovery plan that you are familiar with is geared to improving outcomes over time into 3 bucketed areas, which are there on the slide for you. For this evening, we're going to highlight a few aspects of current work and future planning associated with priorities 1 and 2 that are listed there, and we'll just bring out a few of those highlights in the explanation, and Dr. Cherry Lee will assist us with that.
Thank you. Good evening. So regarding priority 1, vision and shared ownership, I'm going to take note of 3 efforts. First, Stetson's Inclusive Schools training completed by all campuses this spring, followed up by personalized technical on-site assistance for schools that also happened this spring. There's a few happening in June, and then there'll be a couple more in August. We also are providing special education intensive learning sessions at our Leadership Institute in July, and then Principal Institute meetings going on through the 23 and 24 school year. Regarding priority 2, several efforts are underway to improve Tier 1 instruction, specifically a redesign of our curriculum blueprints that include examples and recommendations for scaffolding instruction grounded in universal design for learning. Second, expanded training and implementation of a robust MTSS process centered around building positive relationships with students. And lastly, a focused K-3 literacy initiative for improved direct and systematic phonics instruction aligned with House Bill 3 that includes the purchase of hands-on teaching materials, student consumables, and training for both general education teachers and special education teachers.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. So typically the board has asked us, and Mr. Hicks in the Office of School Leadership team has helped us and to delve in further into lessons from the field, those areas that we're learning from, both for areas of strength and areas for improvement. Mr. Hicks, thank you for taking us through that this evening.
Yes, so we'd like to look at a few schools that have met the goal or exceeded the goals for the progress measures of this year, and think about some of the strategies that they've utilized and how we can take those to scale in more schools. In general, some of the strategies that were used at the secondary level, 2 in particular, were the data-driven assessment and instruction. The use of common assessments through School City were common with the schools that you see listed there. They played a crucial role in evaluating student progress and informing instruction. Also, the co-teaching model and inclusion, especially I'd like to highlight Goriski's use of that when they removed their resource classes and ensured that all students, including those receiving special education services, were part of the same learning environment. It's basic, but it moved the needle for them this year with regards to those numbers. And then the targeted interventions at each one of those schools were implemented to support student learning. They utilized some special advisory classes using IXL and other teacher-created materials to help with just-in-time interventions with students that needed them. At the elementary level, the schools that you see listed really had an intentional collaboration between special education and general education teachers. The principals reported that the PLC process helped in that regard. The general education classroom teachers worked in collaboration also with special education teachers to lead individual goal setting conversations and visual tracking of individual progress with students. And then there were some celebrations and reflections that happened with students so that they would be motivated to continue to work hard. The teachers set specific goals with them, observed the steps the students take to meet those goals, and provided them with the resources necessary to do it, such as increased use of manipulatives in the classroom. And then the master schedules at these schools, the principals reported, were built around special education or framed with special education students in mind rather than the other way around. So those were some of the strategies that worked well with these particular schools and the lessons from the field. So that concludes our presentation at this time, and we're open for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Trustees, any questions or comments? Did you have something? Vice President Foster?
So, I think we all have an appreciation for the disaggregation of data that was introduced, however many years ago with NCLB and all that, and it tells us a lot. One of my ongoing questions is, once we see differences among student populations, what do we make of that, and what's going on? And then how do we account for that in our practices? So if we go and say, all right, well, we're going to enact this strategy, and it's a global strategy that's going to affect all students, and so, okay, all students rose some. Did it do anything with the differences among students? So how do we get granular so that we're not just trying to make global improvements, but rather we're attacking the reality of differences in achievement levels among groups?
So Trustee Foster, Vice President Foster, thank you for that question. The peeling back of the disaggregated data is certainly a part of that conversation. And our Office of School Leadership, not only our interim chief officer here, but our team members in partnership are working alongside us with our school to not only think about the particular materials and the resources and the structures that we're providing, but where we need to make do some additional equity work in terms of cultural proficiency and inclusiveness, the perspectives, and we have to consider, we just presented Wednesday on looking at this will come up later, on our disproportionality data and digging in deeper and thinking about what's the awareness level, what moves to the intention level, what moves to the application level, and how are we calibrating and truly examining that throughout our system. And so those granular discussions are coaching discussions. You can buy materials and resources, and then there has to be a transformational planning and discussion and reflection that starts at that level of awareness and intention. So from that discussion this past Wednesday, looking at these data, our Office of School Leadership, alongside us in our academics team, are building that capacity with our team members. One thing I want to highlight and bring to light, just to sort of color in the spaces around that. For the first time this year, you're familiar that our Professional Learning Exchange Day course was required for all general education and special education teachers. It was a 3-hour course. It was a start, right? It was a start of what we did. This year, there was a cross-functional course developed in close partnership, knowing that the disparities that you're seeing in the student data here, you're going to hear those throughout the system. And so in partnership with our multilingual education team, also with our SOS team, our CP&I, Culture, Proficiency, Inclusiveness, and SEL team, and co-designing, how do we really lift the needs of all learners? And universal design is not only for students with disabilities. We need to design classroom experiences for the students that are there. And there's a lot of layers of the unpacking that still needs to be done there, which you can tell from the data that are reflected here. Mr. Hicks or Dr. Lee, anything else?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and thank you for posing that. I would say that, research shows what we need to be doing, and so I want to thank the board for allowing us to have 75 instructional coaches that are going to be supporting teacher efficacy, because that is the number one research-based data point that moves the needle for teachers, or moves the needle for students rather, right? And it also helps teachers feel confident and stay in the profession longer. We have to ensure that our teachers are equipped with the skills and knowledge that they need. So I'm really excited about having the instructional coaches. It's going to be really important to have their work aligned across campuses, so that all of them are aligned with instructional materials that they're using, as well as the practice, right? We have to have direct instruction, we have to have explicit instruction, we have to have opportunities for creative learning strategies, which we already have in the district, to be embedded in those lesson plans to engage learners. Everything has to be based on that relationship with students first, right? Teaching and learning is predicated on strong relationships. So continue with our SEL across our campuses, starting young, continuing on through 12th grade is going to be important as well. And again, alignment with our instructional coaches, with our academic coaching specialists at the district level, as well as with our special education coordinators and specialists too. So just alignment.
And I would like to add, too, that when we think about the Stetson report and the clear and inclusive vision with shared ownership, what's really important there is the mindset shift that's occurring, that we are intentionally trying to enact in the district, where we think about all students being general education students first, and that on grade level instruction is important for all kids, and there are some variables that might be a part of that. The accommodations, for example, need to be implemented at a very systematically for all kids, and then we need to monitor the progress of kids, and learning needs to be personal for each one and very intentional. I mentioned that some of the schools reported that they had targeted interventions for kids, that they were very targeted in their planning for them, and that's what we need to do as well, is to make sure that on grade level instruction is happening in a systematic way. So the resources that we have available for kids need to be intentional. The people that are working with kids need to be intentional, and the systems that we put in place, we need to be intentional for them as well. And that's what we're working to improve daily.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so if I were to make something up, and I observe teachers, and I go into a classroom and I watch for 15 minutes, and I see that this particular teacher systematically calls on boys and not girls, or systematically and with full non-intentionality is almost expecting these kids to be this way and these kids to be that way. I'll never forget watching a documentary where a teacher said, "Oh, I always love when there's an Indian student in my classroom because I know they're going to be great." And working with pre-service teachers saying, "What do you think about that statement?" And that statement has, of course, broad implications for that particular student, but it has implications for, like, well, gosh, if that's what you see when this student comes in the room, what do you see when another student comes in? Do you go, "Oh man, it's going to be a rough year. I've got 3 of them," whoever the they are. And, one of my observations just over the years of teachers is that nobody got in the game to discriminate against our special populations. Nobody got in the game to discriminate against those who are English language learners. And yet, part of our reality is that we all have these things as part of who we are growing up in our country, given its history. And so the intentionality around having the sharpness to see why these differences are manifest. And sometimes they also have to do with socioeconomic circumstances, so we got to account for that. And they have to do with it. There's so many things going on. But ever looking towards what you all are talking about, which is the fine-grained analysis to understand, that is the benefit of disaggregated data. It shows us that this is going on, and then we are compelled to understand it and then account for it. So I guess I both applaud you and push you towards creating the space and the space of trust so that a teacher can have that revelation Because again, my observation is if I record a teacher and say, here is the recording, I want you to code it for me. I want you to look and see how many times did you do this, how many times did you do that. The teacher will come back in tears because they didn't know that they were engaging in inequitable or racist practice, right? And then that becomes the corrective because they own it, because their hearts were always to do the best that they could do. So being courageous and thoughtful and brave about figuring out the ways, now that we see this disaggregated data and we see these differences, to attack them and declare them as absolutely unacceptable and as a shared responsibility to, develop our folks past them. But also not limit it to, oh my God, it's all the teachers. There's, so many systemic things going on. So I guess what I'll say from the dais is that I'll keep pushing y'all, but pushing you all out of love, and pushing you all out of, I love disaggregated data and I hate disaggregated data because it breaks my heart every time. So thank you all for the work and for allowing this conversation.
Thank you. Any other? Trustee Hunter?
I have two things. One, a question, and then one more so a statement. My first question is, do you have an explanation for the dip that is occurring to a subgroup, except for emerging bilinguals, where we see the dip from boy to moy? So as I look across all of these, both math and reading, I'll make up a number. We start at 60, we move to 49, but we recover, but not up to 60, just to 53. And across each and every one of these categories, save one, that is the pattern. And my question is, what's going on? What's happening? Because if it was just one group, I can say, oh, maybe at some point something is going on, but it's every single group. So have we looked at that data and made any sort of analyses about what's happening? Okay, so students, when we go from boy to moy and moy to end of year. Okay, so if I look here, right, if I look at all African American, it's 55. From fall to winter, it's 43. Now, for African Americans, they don't recover. It's still 43 at the end of the year.
This is fall to fall, so that's last year, fall to this year. Fall.
Yes, so no, this is,
Fall to fall.
yes, fall to fall, boy to boy, then boy to moy, yeah. So we start here, right? Am I right on that? So when the kids took the boy this year.
Can I join in?
Yes, please.
My understanding of this chart, and I don't know whether our viewers can see it, but the first three columns are boy to boy, meaning the 2021 fall.
Here? 22.
21.
Oh, 21, I'm sorry.
And
22 this year.
what percent of students made the projected growth over that full year to 2022? Then the next three columns and the next three columns are comparing this year's boy to moy, this year's moy to end of year.
That's correct.
But the first category is like a different measure because that's looking at over the course of an entire year, what percentage of students made the growth last year. I don't think that negates your question.
No, it doesn't. Just so
But-
you're perfect. Thank you for helping me
Yeah.
with that. So we still see there's a dip and then the rise. It's not as great.
How are they making growth over the course of a whole year, but they're not making the growth from quarter to quarter?
Exactly. Is it quarter? Yeah, whatever.
So are you referring to table 1 from your document? Which
Table
particular?
2 and table 1.
Okay, so
It's on both.
table 1 it's sort of a point of comparison of all students, right? So you're correct. You're looking at all K through 8 students, all K through 8 African American students, right? All K through 8 Latino students. The column it's to show a relative comparison of our students receiving special education services on the bottom all the way across. The first set of columns, Trustee Kaufman is correct, is from that beginning of year where they were, of the prior year, and sort of doing that, tracking those students that's over the year, and then it's measuring something different beginning of year to middle of year in the center section, and beginning of year to end of year. What that is telling us is that our students are making relative growth, but not maintaining their growth target, their growth progress measure. And so there's an expected growth that we would see to show them tracking. This is an overall performance. That's often been a question as well, but that they are not making, they're not either hanging in there at the expected growth target. They could make progress, but not maintain it at the level of where that projected growth was from middle of year of end of year. Please correct me if I've said anything off, or and so we would. Are we looking at the correct one? Yeah, I think we are.
Yes.
Okay. And that's you're noticing it. You're noticing it through the system, right?
Mm-hmm. So we have this information now. If they're not maintained, I mean, the whole point of doing MAP, right, is to track that growth. I know that we get our little chart that says by you're here and by fall, we want you to be at 230 or 260 or whatever. And then it's just like, oh, I only got to 248, Mom. But then in the spring, it was like, oh, so I get that and I see that. But when I look at this, what are we doing about this is my question. Like, we have this data now. That's what the MAP is doing. It's not tracking how well students are doing. It's like, are they meeting their personal individual target? And then we look here to say, hey, everybody as a whole, this is where we are.
So Dr. Susan Diaz has joined us as well.
Thank you.
So I did want to say something about the data, and it's I have spoken with Melissa, who is our MAP representative, because I have pointed out that that first column does not make sense because you're comparing basically 1 year to the next year, and when those kids are taking the test at the beginning of the year, they've spent a whole summer not learning. I mean, not that they're not learning, but they haven't received instruction. So when I present the data to you, I take that off because that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the middle column and the column to the right. So there have been some questions about, this is the way the data has always been reported to you, but I did question, this doesn't make any sense because you're talking about students during the summer and they haven't received any instruction. So I present that data to you, I cut it off. Drew left it in, but I do have concerns about the validity of like what that column is not really telling you anything because again the children are not receiving instruction in the summer, and what we're trying to measure is how they're growing based on the instruction that they're receiving during the school year. So that's another discussion that we need to have about, should that be removed from the reports that you receive?
Well, I mean, I got it now, but if you feel like you need to remove it, that's all good.
Well, I always remove it.
Thank you.
Because,
I appreciate that.
Again, they didn't receive any instruction in the summer.
And so I guess for the superintendent and you guys, when we see these, is to kind of know like, this is what it's showing us, and here's what we're suggesting happens instructionally. So I heard Dr. Lee mention SEL, right? And then my second part is that if we understand the value of SEL, then why is it done so haphazardly? And I don't mean that out of disrespect, because I've been very fortunate to have my kids at school where people were like, come hell or high water, in spite of what everything else is doing, we're going to make sure SEL is taught here. But I know that it's not happening across our system. And so, like you say, we understand it's important from K to 12.
Absolutely.
Like, I just would ask that we kind of think about how that's being implemented. And because right now, I feel as a parent, it's like shoot and die. If you come up craps, you come up craps. If you come up sixes, then good for your school or whatever. But right now, I don't see it across our system. And that may be, again, something where you have to bring me along where it's like, oh, you don't see it here, but it's actually happening here, right? So those are just the two things. It's just one, I really needed to understand this chart.
Right.
I spent a lot of time with this chart today. Trust me.
Yeah,
As someone who has learning comprehension deficit, that was a lot. And then the SEL piece is like, if we know it's important, then why isn't it implemented more? I don't even have the word. I don't know the word.
That fidelity of implementation.
Yeah, great. I just didn't want to use that word.
Yeah, oh, you didn't.
Because we use that word, we throw that word a lot.
All
But
right.
that's really what
But
I mean is
that's
with fidelity.
exactly that alignment and coherence in the system.
Yeah.
And bringing out through scorecard goal 1, sort of what you're finding and the questions you brought, actually table 1, that's your system, right? The special education is that final row. You really elevate the kinds of questions system-wide, not only students with services, because we've got to address the needs of our most marginalized students to lift all boats in the system. So we have to have strong tier 1. We have to have tier 1 is likewise direct SEL and supports. Having that be a part of the overall instructional program for our students and the experience for our students. And to Dr. Diaz's point, we can certainly, I'm curious about us overall changing some of the aspects of the way the board monitoring report is written. It's in a certain template in the way that it's populated. But we want to be able to see our students tracking if they've made the growth that we are likewise looking to see from that beginning of the year to middle of the year and beginning of year to end of year, some of our students maintaining growth, but you're actually trying to see more students kind of beat and continuing to grow even further. So that's something that we can examine. I heard Dr. Leaf, you wanted to add in one other thing?
Yeah, MAP is a very complex tool, right? Because it's measuring both achievement and it's measuring growth. You're seeing growth here, but there's also the achievement aspects, and then disaggregating the different components of your child's learning along the way too. Because like you said, when you get your child's report, you're seeing their growth and their achievement in the different areas that the assessment's measuring. So that might be helpful as well to be able to dive a little deeper into the aspects that the test is measuring.
And we see here, math, but we don't see like at what grade level it's broken down.
Correct.
Like, because I love that
To
when
the
I look at
different
the
areas,
map report
absolutely.
and I'm like, that geometry gets us every time, but algebra, we got that.
And that is so
yeah.
helpful for teachers because the report actually links specific strategies and instructional moves that teachers can be making to support students in those, areas of growth or areas where they're doing really well. Like, what can I do next? Because we're always trying to, grow students. We're not trying to just keep them there. We're trying to grow even students that are doing really well in certain areas as well.
Thank you for helping me understand this and for looking at it overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
I love these data questions. Thanks, Trustee Hunter. Trustee Kaufman, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you also for the data and the presentation. Especially thank you for the look into strategies that you're finding effective. I just want to, I want to renew my request to Superintendent Matias to go to that we include in these reports data on the implementation too. So not just that these are the strategies that we're using, but X number of teachers attended this training, or the 600 new teachers we've hired will be attending that training in August, or we're seeing the use of manipulatives based on this observation tool. We're seeing this practice taking place in this number of classrooms, so we can get a better idea of the strategies to the results, kind of the middle step of implementation. So I don't want to ask for that data tonight, but I just want to kind of put that that we can move towards that being an integral part of these updates. And I also just want to, as I hear some of the strategies that are working for schools, I hope we can also, pinpoint which of those strategies need to be universal, where we know that that's best practice for every single school to be doing, and which ones are those that are the best for that campus. So hearkening back to our Principal of the Year, Keith Moore's words at the celebration, that we, one size does not fit all, and so we need to be able to differentiate. But also, we do know that there are universal best practices. So I just appreciate it if, I know that you're considering that. Coaches, Dr. Lee, you mentioned the 75 coaches. Is that referring to the instructional coaches that have been added back into each Title I campus, I think, receiving an instructional coach?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so interesting. So item number 912 for tonight is the approval of the contract for district-wide professional learning services, which looks like it's the trainer for the coaches. I'm curious, two things. Number one, does the company that won that request that bid, will they be providing the strategies and the coaching on how to differentiate for special education and how to coach for multilingual education as part of that training?
Good evening. Thank you, Trustee Kaufman. Yes, sir. So Engaged to Learn is our partner on that, and the reason that we did choose that as a partner is because they are not a canned, here's your coaching model. They come in, they design with us, and they design around our district priorities, our district values, and absolutely knowing that special education and multilingual education are our top priorities in this district, and that is absolutely like at the forefront of what we're designing for our coaches.
Okay, great. And the number was 75 coaches that I heard from Dr.
80.
Lee. What?
It's actually 90, 80 are out of title, and 10 are out of local.
Okay. So just kind of a coordination check here. The contract indicates, I thought, like 40?
It's the trainer, so
Oh, I
that's who
see.
they're training, and then we will turn that around
Got
for
it.
our coaches. So we're building our internal capacity so that we can continue to push that forward.
Perfect, thank you.
You bet.
All right, and one more data question on the growth targets. So I understand part of the reason that we're looking at the growth is because we know that there are students who are achieving the standard that we want to see them continue to grow, and we know that there are students who are a couple years away from meeting the standards, and we want to recognize that they're on the target, on progress towards that. But help me understand again kind of how to interpret these numbers. So what is the expectation, right? So if we think about like right now, what we expect for the outcomes to be for any group of students, it's going to be somewhere hopefully between where we are today and where we, at 100%, where we want to be. But we're not expecting it to be 100% right now. Is it a reasonable expectation, given the way that the student growth targets are calculated? Is it a reasonable expectation that we could and eventually should be getting 100% every time? Because the target was personalized for that student, and if they're receiving the instruction, and if they're receiving the support, and if they're attending school, and if they're supported at home with getting the work done, that they can all achieve that each year?
Absolutely. We want to see all of our learners making meaningful growth. There will be some students that may not be taking this assessment. That would be determined by a special education team or 504 committee. But the vast majority of our students are taking this assessment along with our STAR test, and we have high expectations for all learners, so they should be meeting their growth target. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's where we're, so these are modest goals still in terms of where we really are trying to get to. Okay. So this is, I did want to just take a moment to highlight, like, this is depressing again, right, to see the results and to know that and this is, again, and it's not just AISD, it's depressing when you look at NAEP scores nationally, it's depressing when you look at any state scores, the gaps that are persistent, and so knowing that that's a universal issue. But I just want, because when I hear what you're telling us and I read between the lines of what you're saying, and when I talk to principals and I talk to teachers and my own experience of committing 30 years to this work for a reason, and I hear that reason for everybody, right? And the reason is that we believe that this is possible, right? We believe that our kids can and must do better, and we own that responsibility and accept the accountability that it's our job to help them get there. And so I just want to, I want to continue to be alarmed by the data, right? But I also want to continue this belief that we can do this. And so this is going to be a little corny, but I just finished watching Ted Lasso today, episode 3. So I'm just going to put this up to remind us that we got to believe that we can do this.
This is called wasted district resources.
All right, thank you.
Okay, love it, love it. Any other trustees? Thank you. I had one, oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Trustee Whitley Chu.
So I heard you talking about a couple campuses that moved from having resource to full inclusion. Is that not something we're doing at all? Let's talk about like middle schools. Do we do that at all middle schools throughout the district?
Inclusion is the expectation. There are some, individual arts can call for some pull out still. So the goal is to move towards full inclusion, and we're just not totally there yet, and I think that the Stetson report did indicate that. So we are still working towards that.
Trustee Whitley Chu, thank you, Mr. Hicks. In addition, it's part of the groundwork we're trying to lay in transformation as a district, the step-by-step for inclusive schools model that Dr. Stetson came and visited with you all about briefly, that all of our sort of a guiding coalition, a team from each of the respective campuses that we just finished that round, really is having us examine and push forward in the future. We have current state and future state to make our system much more service delivery and rather than specific program delivery, and that inclusion component, it's step by step for inclusive schools for a reason. So there is a lot of work being done in that area. Examination, awareness at the individual campus level with the coaching of our own team members and also the Stetson team. And so that is a practice where when our students have greater and greater access with the right and appropriate scaffolds and supports to high quality grade level TEKS instruction with the scaffolds to assist them there, we tend to see greater and greater growth. That's not something that our community hasn't likewise brought forward to us. There are some specially designed services that we need to address for all students depending upon their or their individual education program of their IEP. And so even Dr. Stetson will say that you don't make sweeping moves of any and all things for students, but moving towards how do we not place students over time, that's part of the groundwork we're laying into our current, what's our programming, but shift the needle to really build services around the needs of our students with much more intention. So that was an example of the campus, or there's some campuses that Mr. Hicks highlighted or consolidated in a response, where then not only is there the awareness, but the belief system starts to be changed because we're actually seeing greater and greater progress around those students who are accessing that.
Thank you. And do we have a percentage of so in an inclusion class, is there a policy around what percentage of students have special needs instead of or do we just have, when I taught inclusion at Pierce, we had resource the first year, and the second year we did full inclusion. And my class was a full class size, and it was 50-50. Which now, when I'm reading a book that was Your Students, My Students, it made that as an example of some places do as much as 50-50, which is not acceptable. And I really enjoyed that class. I got to work with Kevin Anderson, who's still at Garcia, who's amazing, and we made it work, but it probably wasn't ideal for students with staffing. So do we have campuses that are still like that? And are we moving towards some goals of what an inclusion class should look like?
Yeah. So really we look at several things in sort of the Stetson approach around where are the advanced supports, where can we have particular peer models. You're talking more around like a co-teaching setting. There's a variety of ways that we can address inclusive needs of students, that being one structure. And so we look at, we do have examples. Dr. Stetson would say between sort of the general population and up to a third of that classroom should be the desired outcome. And that's why we look at examining our special education services, supports, and our staffing. I couldn't have said this in the same way even a year ago, and we're certainly not there yet. Much more around sort of the individual needs of the students. We have some basic pieces, but the student-centered model that looks at the needs of where our collective number of students within the school, within a particular class, need to be addressed. We aren't there yet. To answer you more succinctly, I gave you a paragraph and should have said, we're not there yet, but that's part of the future state that we're building the foundation for now.
Thank you. And yes, Trustee Boswell.
Just a couple of things. Thank you for all of the presentation, the conversation. Thank you to all of my colleagues for the conversation and both the frustration and the hope. We are all here because we believe that's possible. And yet we see this over and over. So thank you for that. I really appreciate the conversation about the outliers that do show us that there's reason to believe that. And I really appreciate you offering and sharing some new strategies. It's hard. We've had times when we've come for monitoring reports and we've come back and it's been the same strategies. Speaking less about you, but just sometimes, and it feels, I really appreciate the new approaches and the approaches that are reflected in our budget, in the Stetson, work with Stetson, in the training that's being done. Really appreciate that beginning to show up here. And I hope as it begins to show up in your planning that it starts to show up in our data. So thank you for bringing that and really highlighting that and making that part of what will be done, because we have to do things differently if we're going to get different outcomes. So I appreciate that. I would love for your PowerPoint, if we can put that online in board docs, that would be valuable because I think it offers helpful context. And would love to see that for anyone who is going back and looking. I do have a question about a strategy that I don't see. I know you're working with families to help deepen understanding of special education services, doing really good work, and I don't see that partnership reflected in the strategies. Is that something that you expect will show up in the way students are achieving?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that. Thank you. So we didn't talk about family and community engagement or partnerships right now, but something Dr. Robinette and the team and the superintendent and I have all talked about is the importance of building parents' capacity and understanding about the special education process. So something that we are working on right now is our Arc of Learning for Families, and we're going to have 10 opportunities for families across the year to come to basically a primer on special education, right? The ABCs of the IEP, because it's really complex and there's a lot of acronyms in special education and it starts to feel like alphabet soup and a lot of procedure and a lot of law. And at the end of the day, this is about your student and your student making progress. And so it's going to be about explaining parents' rights, but also giving them the information to stay organized, right? Because there's a lot of paperwork in special education. So it'll be everything from, just like I said, basically the 1, 2, 3s of the IEP, right? Also how to communicate and ask questions that you may have about your child's progress and growth, and different resources in the community, as well as future training that we're offering as well. So we're going to continue with our parent power hours. But we're also going to add this for families as well. We're also going to be partnering with our parent support specialist. Many of our parent power hours are virtual, and what we're going to be doing is offering our parent support specialists the opportunity to host families to stream those sessions for them. Yeah. So we're hoping that'll encourage more engagement and give parents an opportunity to ask us questions and help us build our program as well.
Okay. And is the hope that that will begin to show up in how students are achieving and really show up in the performance that we're hoping to see?
Absolutely.
And the
It's
success?
all interconnected. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. I really
And there are
appreciate
several
that.
things, Trustee Boswell, that we didn't go into with great detail. Just to point you, I know you're aware of it, the public, to our action plan. That arc of learning that Dr. Lee talked about. That's not only in sessions, it's in resources, in tools. I have to highlight at our SEAC meeting, our Special Education Advisory Council meeting, that was here close to the end of the year. The team that was there with us, the committee wanted to examine and likewise say where are some key areas we want to lean in further. And I'll tell you, they wanted to lean in further heavily around 2E, which is around developing arcs of learning for capacity building at all levels of the system. I'm reversing there. It was around our parents, 1E, a community connection. Sorry, I got my numbers messed up there. Increasing family and community engagement and outreach to build trust. So a great collection of parents, caregivers who have a lot to share with us, not only in the form of nesting side by side, not only in the learning and things that we're providing, but being good resources to one another, doing that in community, building that capacity, and then likewise having us, a whole nother part of our plan is around the components around tools for families and helping them to navigate, as Dr. Lee said, throughout our system.
Fantastic.
So being on that journey, not alone, is really important.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I know that aligns with our board policy about family engagement. Really appreciate using those advisory bodies for their expertise. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I have one other question. I know Mendez is top of mind, and it doesn't show up in the report. Do we know how this information is working there? Will we be hearing about that in June at our next meeting when we hear from Mendez?
We'll be sure to include that.
So yeah, Trustee Boswell, I'll work with Heather Petrozzini and we'll provide an update and kind of align expectations. We still have an opportunity to do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Trustee Gonzalez.
Sorry, the microphone is stuck to the table. Thank you, President Singh. I wanted to ask about something that Trustee Whitley Chu brought up. From what I understood based on that conversation, it sounds like we're going to be phasing out certain classrooms in order to better include students of all ability levels in the general education setting. And it reminded me of something that I've seen principals doing recently, which is posting advertisements for positions that they have at their specific campus. And in those advertisements, I've seen language advertising certain classrooms as units. And it doesn't appear very inclusive to me that certain children are in units and that other children are in classrooms. And so I'd just like to point that out and ask that we consider that, because those are all over the place. Those are shared very widely. And I'd like to believe that we're working towards what was discussed with Trustee Whitley Chu. The other thing that I wanted to add is just to second what Trustee Hunter and Dr. Kaufman raised up, which is just around the implementation. I agree with all the antecedents that you identified in those outlier campuses, that those are absolutely what is necessary in order to create the most opportunities for a student to experience growth in the classroom, knowing what your master schedule is, having a positive rapport with your students, cultivating a relationship. Having recently been on a campus, I just really want to encourage the monitoring of the implementation of all those things. I know that I experienced different levels of accessibility to my master schedule as a classroom teacher. There were certain years and certain campuses where I didn't receive the master schedule until the week before that the school year started. And then there were other years where I had it at the end of the previous school year. And so those differences allow me as a teacher to plan very differently for all the children that I'm going to have in my classroom. But I agree with what your conclusions are. These are areas where we need to grow, and I agree that you know those things. I just don't feel confident that is going to happen going into this upcoming school year, that things are going to be dramatically different. And I want to feel that way, that every math teacher that has a special education student feels confident in writing an IEP, feels confident in progress monitoring all of their students in those goals identified in the IEP, that they're supported by their campus principal in professional development, all those things. So anyway, I don't have to bemoan, I guess, the disappointment of the data, but I just second what Trustee Hunter and Kaufman had asked about. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Gonzalez. Always helpful to hear from someone who's been in the classroom recently, so thank you for that. Are there any other comments from trustees? So I would like to just ask a question. First of all, this is amazing, and you guys are doing such good work, and just I can tell, the multiple references to Dr. Stetson, like I know we're using the recommendations that have, like we're leaning into that. So just thank you all for your commitment to this. And just building off the implementation fidelity and other factors beyond just the quality of teaching, how how soon are teachers getting their schedules is a factor. But I always go back to looking at the actual staffing at the campuses. So I am, once again, like really glad we're investing in compensation and that $7,000 bonus for our SPED teachers, especially as I look at, one of our recent board updates, Superintendent Segura, and looking at where our SPED vacancies are, over 60% or 60, I think it's like 66% of them are in our Title I campuses. Right now, maybe it's gotten better since May when this report was given to us. But I would love to hear at a future meeting just more about how we are steering our most qualified teachers to the campuses that need it most, because that is like the fundamental, like that's the first step in implementation. Fidelity is there a certified teacher in that classroom, and then we can worry about, are they actually doing all of the right types of instruction? So I think that's a really critical piece of all of this. The other thing I'd be really interested in looking at is I'm wondering if like the number of students with IEPs in a classroom has an impact on scores on the map. So if you have a teacher that has, 7 students with an IEP versus a teacher who has maybe 15 or 16, and it's, one teacher in each classroom with the same qualifications, I would imagine that, there are some differences in student outcomes, yet we're not really capturing that yet in our board monitoring report. So I worry sometimes that we're missing some of the pieces that are contributing to the outliers that are successful. And now I'm not trying to continue plugging the DRE department, but that is something that a DRE department would help us see. Like that's the manpower, right? That and woman power that we would want to use to help us make good decisions for our students. But regardless of all that, I know that you guys are aware of this, but I just wanted to have us as a board think about that as we go into Lone Star governance later this summer, and think about how we might tweak our board monitoring reports to be more helpful to us. So thank you for that. Any other trustees have comments? All right. Well, I believe. Oh.
Thank the team.
Oh, thank you, team.
No, can we ask them the team who put it together?
Oh yeah, can you share with us who else is on your team, or would you like to say anything about your team that's been working?
Or who's
with
here
you?
tonight?
That's here tonight.
So from our special, we're all on one team, so that's the great thing
Great
about
answer.
it.
Love it.
There you go.
Shared ownership, we're all on one
Yes.
team. As part of special education, of course, you've met Dr. Lee, Dr. Teresa Rocha-Gill, our executive director. Is she still back there? There she is. There you are. Of evaluations and compliance. Mr. Hicks, or do you want me to announce them? You go right ahead.
Everybody could stand and they would be part of the team when we think about shared accountability. But if I single out those that are in the Office of School Leadership, we have Lakeisha Drinks with us tonight with the Elementary Associate Superintendent, and we have Dr. Angel Wilson with us, the Secondary Assistant Superintendent. I'm sorry, Mr. Segura. I'd also like to recognize Yvette Cardenas that's here as well from the Multilingual Department. She plays an important role in working with our team as well. And Dr. Diaz.
And Dr. Diaz, Dr. V.
See, we're going to forget somebody that's why I said everyone should just stand.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kaufman.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Great. And particular shout out to our 2 new associate superintendents. Is that what they're called? Assistant superintendents. Yes. Lakeisha Driggs and Dr. Angel Wilson. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so I wanted to, okay, so this really ends the section on the information reports from the administration. So We will now move into the preview of the upcoming regular board agendas. And this really allows the public and trustees the opportunity to review the agenda items that will be considered for a vote at our next regular board meeting. AISD staff is available to answer any questions for tonight's preview. So we will begin tonight with item 8, which is the agenda preview for upcoming academics and curriculum items. So please note that the administration is pulling item 8.3, approval of the Head Start approval corrective action plan. And we'll bring this item back in August. And I wanted to double check, Trustee Kaufman, did we remove the one item that you were interested?
Yes, Vice President has addressed that.
Okay.
So that, I mean, that was 12.1 EHBE local policy updates.
Okay, so that will also be moved.
We'll move it.
We'll move that. Okay, thank you.
Separate vote.
Yes. Well, no, that's
No.
actually, we were actually requesting that that would be moved to, like, to
Yeah,
the
Trustee Foster has the
August,
plan.
agenda. And the reason there, would you like to share, Policy Committee Chair, on the rationale? Just for transparency.
I'll let Trustee Kaufman speak. He made
Sure, I
the
requested to be
yeah.
pulled for two reasons. One is because the Chapter 89, which is the state regulations regarding bilingual education, is subject to updates that will take place in August. And secondly, I was not at the policy meeting that addressed it, and I have several questions that I would like to address before we bring it back to the board.
Okay, so is that all right, Superintendent Seguda? Okay, thank you. All right, so, so we will start with the agenda preview for academics and curriculums, items 8.1 through 8.4. Are there any questions on any of those items? Okay. Next, we will move to the finance section, business and finance section, 9.1 through 9.16. It's business and finance. Okay.
It's 9.16, right?
Yes, 9.1 to 9.16. Yes. Yes, question.
Just making sure. This is 9.1. This is Scott, yes. I'm in the right place.
Yes. Did you have a question about that?
I do have a question about that.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell on myself real quick. So I registered my kid on Tuesday. It's a little late, but as I was registering my daughter, I noticed that the superintendent and I, we had spoken about this earlier, that there's sort of a screen that allows you to skip reading the student success guide. You can just go down to the bottom and sign it. You're just acknowledging that you know you have access to it, kind of like HIPAA, but did you actually read it? And so when I was reading it, the one thing, because I did go in and read the guide, and I guess I just need a little bit of clarification about this, Mr. Adams. When the question is, do we change anything major? I know this first round right here, we've just done really minor tweaks and a new letter and those things. But is there any point within the year that we could change something that would be super important, or we just at the beginning of the year, and then if there's something changed, we just change it the following year?
Good evening, trustees. Good question there. So one thing that we do is we do provide a advisory lesson to students so that at the beginning of the year, it is thoroughly reviewed with them in the classroom. In July, we do receive the TASB's Model Student Code of Conduct. So what we'll do this year is we'll look at that, we'll take it to our discipline work group, it'll be provided to the board policy for review, and then they can take that to the trustees to see if there's anything that needs to be amended in the student code of conduct. So it could be something that we could amend this year, or it could be for a future amendment. Now, there are some updates that go into effect September 1st. One of them is already included in our policy. There's still two that the governor is waiting, that's on the governor's desk. So those things that are required by TA, they may require an immediate update.
Okay, so my question is then, how do we tell parents? Because nobody looks at that until their kid is in trouble, right? Then they're like, oh, I got y'all now, let me find it on page. Nobody's going, let me see what I'm actually obligated to do as a parent in the district, right? I really think that some sort of, I don't know, way to help parents. You mentioned there's an advisory lesson. So I talked to my kid about this, who is actually, pretty fastidious and is quick to tell you when something is boring. Has never experienced that lesson. I don't know if, again, it's one of those systematic things that, like, why isn't, with Fidelity being across all systems, I think this is, as a teacher, right, this is a great advisory lesson. I think if you empowered kids to know their, like, you go to the rights and the response, like, these are your rights as a student, they would be like all in, like, yeah, I know what I'm supposed to be doing because I know how to get out of trouble or whatever, right? They would be paying attention. But I don't know that this is being shared with students, right? It's being, like, you broke this rule on this page, now you're in trouble. But when do we ever say, you're owed this as a young person that we have care for? These are the things that you should know that we're responsible as adults for you. And I don't know that we do that, and people might, it's a success guide, right? We're no longer treating it like the behaviors don't do, but like this is what you're entitled to. So I really don't know how the administration would want to attack it that way so that people actually are, you can't make people read the darn thing, but you could make it more attractive. And kids can know, hey, mama, did you know that I have the right to have a counselor? Did you know that I have the right to ... Because that's not what we dream here is not happening down there. I don't know how the administration chooses to implement that, but I would really ask the superintendent that we look at that and see that that's actually happening. Because it's actually a pretty darn good document, right? There's some really good stuff in there. And I really think that kids, you have to make the lesson interesting and engaging. But to know their rights, but you also have responsibilities because you attend school to keep everyone safe. And I just think that that message is not getting across. It's a box that we, parents, are checking and never looking at it. I mean, there's people here that register their kids. I don't know if you've ever read it. She's like, don't point me out, don't shame me here. But that's just one thing that I wanted to point out about it. I did read it. I feel like you guys have worked really hard on this. You've put things into levels. You've done some good work. But if nobody ever reads it, I mean, you could help us with emails too if people read it. Not saying I won't take emails, that's my job. But I think that this would help people if we could somehow get it into their hands. If parent support specialists could have a same little lesson and be like, hey, today we're gonna cover what's actually in the 64-page document that none of you read. Right? And I think that would be helpful. I'm just kind of making suggestions about that because we get caught up, literally, we perish because of lack of knowledge. There's good stuff in here, and it's not all about punishment. It's about what you're due, what you're owed as a citizen in a public school. So I just thank you guys for the hard work. And I mean, it's really a lot better than some of the other iterations. So it's really, really good, but it doesn't do anybody any good if nobody's reading this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Trustee Fontaine.
Yeah, and we should, of course, lift up Dr. Gloria Williams, who's shepherded the development of this and the, I dare say, dramatic improvement of this document and the reframing and reimagining of this is the penal code to this is imagined as something different. And I think we can feel it. And I guess my suggestion, dare I say, to the administration would be to actually go to Dr. Williams and the same way she pulled together students and families and stakeholders to improve the guide, I think go back to Dr. Williams to work with the same groups of people to think through exactly what you're talking about. How do we make this most accessible to students? And I bet we'd get there.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other trustees? Yes, Trustee Lugo.
Yeah, just to piggyback. So don't call me out. No, I did read it as part of my duties of the school board. However, as a parent, now that does not mean that this is not an important document, right? It kind of speaks to what Trustee Hunter was saying, is that, parent, and for any of y'all that have small children, tall children, little children, old children, we don't always have enough time. We don't always, it's so hard. And I do agree with Trustee Foster that, y'all are the experts. I can come up with 1,000 ideas, 99 of them are gonna be, 999? Yeah, I don't know how to do math. Y'all are the experts. Y'all are going to come up with some great ideas for how to make it interactive. And if you want a guinea pig for somebody who has a short attention span and not a lot of time, I'm up for it. I'll watch a video or whatever, sit down and be taught a lesson. I'll fill out the parent survey while I'm at it. So, no, in all seriousness, thank you for the hard work. Thank you so much.
So I think one of the is obviously great. I love that. I think it's great feedback. What's great about the end of the year is that we get to plan. I feel like we haven't had a great opportunity to plan because just the amount of disruptions that have occurred over the last year. So really looking forward to working with the team to identify what opportunities exist in the near term and also the long term. This is definitely one that we can progress. Just kind of thinking through it already in my head. There's tons of opportunities. So well received. Appreciate the feedback and happy to do it. And we'll work with the team and get it done.
Thank you. Any other trustees? Yes.
Not on this.
Okay. Anyone more on the handbook? Okay. On a different one?
Yes, I have two. The first one is 9.5, the Teen Parent Child Care Service. And my main question is whether this contract is sufficient to cover the need, whether we have wait lists, and whether that's something that we need to just consider going forward in budgeting or work with our community going forward.
So the contract that you have before you would cover specific high schools where we have these programs, but based on the data that we have, there are further needs. And so one of the things that we could look at is potentially in the future either expanding the contract or expanding it internally as well. And so those are opportunities that we have to research and see where we can cover the need.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos.
Thank you. Any other questions for this section?
Wondering if Dr. Williams has something to share.
No, I just wanted to update you that we do have 3 campuses that serve our teen parents.
Mike, please.
Sorry. We do have 3 high schools that support our teen parents, Garza, Navarro, and Travis. And right now, we are serving all of the students that are available to us.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then I have a second one. Item 9.16, the special counsels to the Austin ISD Board of Trustees. It was due for an RFQ. We put one out. There's a committee. Trustee Gonzalez, Trustee Kaufman, Trustee Willie Chu, and I are a committee evaluating those RFQs. And the committee's recommendation, I know it's on the agenda for possible action on the 22nd, and our recommendation is we feel like we want more time to do our due diligence, and that we would like to move that item to August for a vote instead of June.
Okay. I'm good with that. Thank you. Yes, Trustee Foster.
Going back to the teen parent contract, I'd just like to ask the administration, is there a visioning or philosophy of practice or just principal autonomy in terms of where we provide those services?
Dr. Williams, would you like to come up? She would be the expert.
The campuses that I mentioned are the campuses with the larger number of students. We can even serve a student from another school as long as we can provide the transportation to have their baby served at that school.
How are the campuses determined?
Based on need, accessibility, If you notice, those three schools have served the kids for a number of years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other trustees? Yes, trustee Zapata.
On item 9.4, it's just an example because they're on the agenda, but this is a partner, the Family Resource Centers that have been partners with AISD for years. So, and they do a lot of great work. I love the people I work with the organization. But how do we help partners like this and to, because I didn't get to finish the report. I don't know if anybody else did. How is it aligned with student growth, academically, behavior, how are we tracking that and with some of our partners? Because they do a lot of great work with our parents and community, but how does that trickle down to our student outcomes? So I just wanted to share that. And if any of you saw that in the report.
So, Tracy Zapata, and I don't know if we want to have Dr. Williams or maybe Ed come up as well to have a conversation around this agenda item specifically. So we recognize that the Family Resource Centers provide supports to the community that support the whole child, right? We recognize that there are limitations in how we support our students because, we need to support them fully and wholly if we're going to be able to show progress. We recognize that we have partners that have done great work with us for many, many years, and we also recognize that we have to go through a process to identify who those partners are. But in each and every evaluation, each and every process, we always try to determine, what are we measuring? Are the costs that are going to be incurred going to move the needle for our students and families? And where we have an opportunity to expand services, we certainly like to do that. I don't know if we have key performance indicators. I doubt that we do regarding kind of what that investment looks like for this specific opportunity. But we can maybe get together and maybe identify what those could look like, if that would be helpful. And we can maybe provide that as a kind of, you almost say like, okay, what have we observed over the last several years regarding these partnerships, and how can we prove that this has supported the students at those campuses? That would be, I think, okay.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm making Trustee Foster do things. Trustee Zapata, I think the trustees recently received the Family Resource Center Impact Report from Austin Voices, and that has some good information. And is it correct that that's part of our contract with our Family Resource Center providers? Okay, thank you. And then, since y'all are up here, would you mind saying a few words about where we are, what we're approving and who we're approving, or who we're going to be voting on in a couple of weeks? And Trustee Zapata, did you have something else too?
Yeah, so I'm not, I'm just because they're on the agenda today, I've just brought it up, but it's just in general with all our partners.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to go into any
cool.
details. Yeah.
Got it.
Thank you.
So for the Family Resource Centers, could you just share a little bit on the approach?
Mm-hmm. So what you see before you that you'll vote on at the June 22nd meeting was an RFP specifically for the Family Resource Centers. We had 3 proposals come in, 2 very strong proposals from 2 long-time partners with Austin ISD. That was Austin Voices for Education and Youth and Communities and Schools of Central Texas. So we went through the procurement process, the evaluation process, and once all that was finalized, including interviews with 2 of the top organizations, the difference in point systems, which doesn't happen very often, was less than half a point. And so usually you have a big separation between the vendor that you will recommend. because the points were so close, because these are two strong organizations that currently are partners within the district, our recommendation is to begin contract negotiations with both partners. So we are awarding contracts to both partners.
Okay, great. Thank you, I appreciate that. All right, if there are no more questions, I will thank you both. I'll move on to the agenda preview for Section 10, Facilities. Any questions or comments? All right, number 11 is Human Resources. Any questions or comments on those? All right, the next section is 12, Policy. And again, just please note, we'll be pulling item 12.1, EHBE Local Special Programs, Bilingual Education, ESL, and we'll bring this item back in August. But trustees, are there any questions on the policy items?
I don't actually.
Trustee Hunter?
I don't actually see I don't see Oscar, and I don't see Katie, so maybe this question can wait. It was about our new system.
She's here.
Oh.
Well, I just had a quick question. No, I'll send an email.
Do you want to ask me and then I can
Well,
just?
well, maybe you can look out for us, yeah. So 12.3 on our new system, I know that a lot of people in the Eastern Crescent of our community are very concerned about our new school that's opening because we're using the term, we don't want to over-enroll it. And while at the same time, we have over-enrollment all over our district. And I'm wondering if our new system is going to be able to help with that. I know that as we have some schools that are at like 110, 107, 105, is this system going to help us in any way, say, like, I know transfers is a part of it, but I really don't understand how it's a part of it and like what it will do. But is there anything built into the system that was like, you're at 99%, you need to be watching out for school A?
So Trustee Hunter, I can probably actually answer this question.
Oh, excellent.
So the platform will help us manage all of it. I think what we've observed the last several years is that we have multiple systems managing multiple things. For instance, like, multilingual transfers, or we have, priority transfers. All of these things have historically lived in different areas within the organization. So we will have a platform that can align all of it. It's up to us as an organization to determine kind of what we want it to track. So that opportunity does exist. Your point around, capacity versus utilization, that is a discussion that will take place with the board. I do know that the planning committees, the long-range planning committees, as well as the Equity Advisory Committee has made some recommendations regarding policy and kind of what to track, and then what to do once you begin to encroach on one of those kind of thresholds, whether it's 110% or 85%. But we don't have consensus, and there isn't a policy yet that has that, right? But we will have that conversation with the board, I would suspect probably early next year, so that it's codified in policy, and then we can begin to track it over the course of the year and then make adjustments. So yes, would be my response at this point. But yes, it will track all of those things.
So early next school year, early next calendar year?
Early next school year.
Okay.
That conversation, I think, will be helpful because we'll be able to take whatever comes out of that policy discussion and then begin to monitor those campuses as they go through the school year. And so by the time that we get to the end of the 23-24 school year, we'll have almost an entire year of data, and we'll be able to understand how that kind of aligns or doesn't align with the board policy. Again, we do have recommendations from the Long Range Planning Committee as well as the Equity Advisory Committee, but that is yet to become codified in policy.
Okay. Thank you. And is there one more thing? I mean, I received a copy today. Is there a way that the policy committee could receive a copy of I know we have like the big piece of the LRs, but if we could receive those recommendations from EAC, or how do you want to do that?
Let me come up with a recommendation, because there are two things that are occurring. We had the long range planning document, and then we have the Equity Advisory Committee recommendations, and they are very much aligned, but I would want to get with Dr. Holly and her team because she has been working it before I make a final recommendation to the board.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That'd be very helpful.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. All right, so we will now move on to section 13, other. So trustees, are there any questions on these items? Oh, yes, trustee Gonzalez.
Thank you. On 13.3, are avid tutors included in the new minimum wage that the district has just passed or is going to pass?
I'm seeing nods, but I'd like to have Chief Hosek respond to that.
Good evening. Yes, sir, we are actually right in the middle of adjusting all of our compensation rates based on the breadth of the compensation package. So we go and we adjust our hourly rates as well, and we're happy to do that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That was my only question. Thank you.
That's a great question. Easy one. All right, anyone else? Okay. All right, and I guess that's it for our regular agenda preview. So we will now recess the open meeting at 9:23 p.m. and move to executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code. Am I forgetting something? Okay. Texas Government Code sections 551.074, 551.072, 551.073, 551.087, 551.076, 551.0821, and 551.071. When we are finished with the executive session, we will briefly return to the open session to take action on transfer appeals and to formally adjourn the meeting. The action and adjournment will be recorded and be included in all replays of tonight's meeting. So thank you so much for joining us and have a great evening.